50 participants, but we will keep on looking at the number of participants that are joining in. But I'm hoping that we'll be having a successful Internet Governance Forum discussion under the theme of digital interdependence. Mr. Wesley, can you hear me?
Loud and clear, Mr. Mfukwe.
Oh, thanks very much. Mr. Wesley, I think you can go ahead, introduce yourself, and then you can do your opening and welcome to everyone. Thanks very much. And just before you come in, I'd just like to request that whoever wants to speak, please switch on your video so that we can see the face behind the voice. And once you are done speaking, please switch off, because if we've got a lot of videos that are showing, it strains bandwidth, and some people don't have enough speed to keep up with all these videos. So thanks very much, Mr. Mutsi. I hand over to you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Program Director, or should I rather say Interim Program Director. But nonetheless, thank you. A very good morning and a warm welcome to everyone who is online, and also those that are joining us via YouTube and the various platforms which we are streaming on.
I won't be able to. Yeah.
Once more, welcome to the 2021 South African Internet Governance Forum, and under the Digital Interdependence theme. Let me firstly acknowledge the presence of the Deputy Minister of the Department of Digital and Communication Technologies, the Honorable Ms. Pinky Kekana, the members of the ZA Multi-Stakeholder Committee on Internet Governance in South Africa, the various board members from the various entities whom are online, the colleagues from DCDT. As I've acknowledged board members, I would also like to acknowledge the managing directors and executives from the various entities, including some of my sister brother SOEs from DCDT. And of course, it goes without saying, I have to also extend acknowledgement to both the ZETNA members, partners, and of course, some of my board members who are already online. On that note, once more, thank you very much for your attendance, and of course, a very good evening. One has to acknowledge seeing the names and of course, some of the familiar faces from one's past life. It gives them comfort that they are also partaking in this endeavor, of course, activities that will embark on the coming 2 days. I am looking forward to the engagement, and most notably, of course, the outcomes thereof. Because unfortunately, due to the consequences of COVID-19 pandemic, certain of these consequences have been brought to the fore, especially those that impact directly internet governance issues. And of course, I'm of the hope that through the deliberations and then of course the outcomes thereof, these will be sort of partially highlighted, and of course also proposal will be put as to how to best them. And notable of these issues, these include but not limited to legal issues, legislative issues, of course infrastructural issues, and then the other issue that has been highlighted is human rights, speaking to protection of those that protection of rights of those that partake within and use the internet as a means of communication to their loved one and so forth. And most importantly, the economic issues that were brought to the fore to say, how does the internet provide livelihoods for the various entities and of course South Africans that were affected by the pandemic. And more so, I'm confident that this discussion for the next coming 2 days will produce ways on how to address or better address and narrow the digital divide, which of course through, as highlighted through the theme of the 2 days or this particular session, it has widened due to the pandemic. And of course, through the deliberation, I'm of the hope that this divide will be narrowed, thus ensuring that we provide a secure and inclusive and accessible internet space. I think colleagues, participants, and panelists who are online, my job is quite easy, as I think it's just to introduce the concept. And I would not like to steal the thunder from Mr. Mfikwe and the Honorable Deputy Minister. With that noted, I will hand over back to Mr. Mfikwe to provide, of course, an overview of the South African IGF, as indicated previously, and also followed by then the Honorable Deputy Minister, who will then provide the keynote address. Once more, colleagues, participants, members, executives, and South Africans, I welcome everyone and thank you very much for your attendance. Back to you, Dr. Mfikwe.
Thanks very much, Dr. Wesi. I'm hoping that Andile has actually sorted out his connectivity issues. But in the meantime, I will continue. So once again, good morning, gentlemen. Deputy Minister of the Department of Communication and Digital Technologies, staff of the department, the CEO and staff and board members of the South African Domain Name Authority, panelists and participants. On behalf of the South African IGF committee, I would like to thank you for taking this opportunity to join the 8th South African IGF. And we are really hoping that you will find the deliberations very fruitful and engaging. And I would like to start off by saying that although the internet was considered a luxury, a commodity a mere decade ago, it can now be considered as one of the most essential of public utilities, along with water, electricity, and natural gas. Electricity was considered a luxury commodity in the early 19th century and quickly became a public utility in the 20th century. So the internet has done the same recently because electricity has mechanized the world and helped reduce poverty, while internet can facilitate easier management of other public utilities and promote clean governance on a wider scale. So for those with access and those without, the internet has become a necessary part of their daily life. So now coming to the internet governance. Internet governance is usually defined as the development, application by governments and the private sector and civil society of principles, policies, norms, rules, decisions, making procedure and programs that shape the evolution, use and development of the internet. So over the next 2 days, we will have a total of around 43 speakers, 9 moderators, and 9 sessions focusing on pertinent issues for influencing the development of the local digital landscape, from education, universal access, enhancing a multi-stakeholder approach to digital economy. And then the second day will focus on finding ways to unlock the digital potential, disinformation and fake news, cybersecurity, IP, and copyright, including data protection and privacy. Domain abuse and who is database management and access will also be looked into. So the main activities of the South African IGF, this particular South African IGF, they will include, we will see some presentations, some panel discussions. We will also be having some Q&As, whereby we open up the floor for participants to engage the presenters and the panelists. And the main 2021 questions to be answered and deliberated on. Number one, it's what has been done to improve the quality of access and online education. Number two, community networks continue to connect the unconnected and marginalized in the most affordable way, but they still face the challenges in scaling up and also in institutional support. So we'll be having a discussion around that. And then we will also look at various alternatives and practices when it comes to a multi-stakeholder approach in infrastructure development and cybersecurity. We'll be looking at the integration of the real economy with the digital economy and also discussing the effects of artificial intelligence and 5G. We'll be exploring the digital literacy programs designed to empower and educate young people. We'll also be looking at lessons learned during COVID-19 in relation to the impact of media in relation to disinformation and fake news. And we'll also be trying to attempt to answer the question in terms of what kind of cyber incidents took place in South Africa and how has this changed since the COVID pandemic, and what capacity building initiatives have been taken in data protection and also in combating cybercrime. So without necessarily having to go through the entire agenda, the list discussion will be around the access of who is database in terms of the frameworks and the guidelines locally, in terms because the access to the who is database is another tool or another way that also assists in combating cybercrime. So I just wanted to also make mention that the first South African IGF committee was appointed in 2017 in Cape Town during the 5th South African IGF. So 2020, which was last year, marked the end of their 3-year term, but due to the COVID pandemic-related challenges, we could not hold the South African IGF in 2020. So this year, which is 2021, we will also hold live elections during the IGF, which is basically tomorrow. So that will enable us to form a committee that will take the South African IGF and related activities forward in the next 3 years. Currently, we have 6 members on the committee. The chairperson for the committee, we had Peter Madavu from Zetna. We had Ntsako Mangai from Media Monitoring Africa. And then we had government, from government side, we had Moses Hoboi. And then we had Commissioner Govender, who was our secretary coming from Cyber Law Firm. And then we had Andy Les Kosana from the business side. And myself, Tatum Fike, I was representing civil society. Also note that the South African IGF is an independent organization with its own constitution, responsible for planning and coordinating the South African IGF and related activities in the country. And these are normally funded by the South African Domain Name Authority, the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies, and their partners. The committee has, in their term of service, continually maintained the principles of openness and transparency, inclusiveness, multi-stakeholderism, and non-commercial and bottom-up nature of coordination of the local IGFs as per the NRI toolkit. So a lot still needs to be done, as the first South African School of Internet Governance was completed in 2019 in partnership with Internet Society South Africa Gauteng Chapter, ZEDNA, and the Department of Telecommunication and Postal Services, as it was known back then in Mbombela, Mpumalanga. So the said school also included theory and practical training on community network and policy advocacy in order to propel students in the digital policy discourse and community networking fraternity. And we were great to have various faculty members, thought leaders, experts, professionals from various sectors of the local digital economy. So the School of Internet Governance is an inclusive capacity building initiative that has special focus on teaching students on how to, so that they are able to understand the prevalent role players within the internet ecosystem and how the policy development processes work within the country. So it is our collective effort that we build, secure, and protect the internet and its development. That is why it is required that a multi-stakeholder approach is applied, whereby every sector of society is involved, as the cyber space is never governed by just one party, but a collective of business, community, government, academia, civil society, and users, and basically everyone that benefits from the internet. So coming back again to the School of Internet Governance, they've been around for over a decade ago, having started in 2007 with the European School of Internet Governance, which took place in Germany. And the school have now spread around the world. Each of the school, they have developed a curriculum based on their local needs. And a lot still needs to be done to ensure that Africa in the Global Internet Governance Forum is well represented. And we need to make sure that the voices of the marginalized are heard and attended to. And we have what we call the African School of Internet Governance that is coordinated by the aggressive APC, actually, which is making strides in building African leaders in the internet governance space. And now we are starting to see and hear voices from the Internet Governance Forum. So the structure of our AGM, it also touches on issues around education and access, because internet continues to become a critical enabler for social and economic change, transforming how government, business, citizens interact, and offering new ways of addressing the development challenges. It also has transformed, the internet also transformed education by creating a culture of learning and accessing new information. So the success of internet in education will be measured by the educational outcomes, improvement in student retention, job opportunities, and contribution to national development. So none of these gains is guaranteed. However, achieving them requires affordable access to the internet. It also requires people having the knowledge and the tools to know how to use the internet. So we were also planning to also look at a universal service access fund, which was originally set up in 1997, to ensure that the people who are not connected, they actually get connected, because connecting the unconnected is about collaboration, collective approaches, and partnerships amongst different stakeholders across different sectors. It's about understanding the needs of people in terms of connectivity, literacy, access to content in different formats and languages, and services. It's about bringing the cost of services and devices down. It's about empowering people who lack basic ICT skills with the means to participate in the digital ecosystem. So fake news and disinformation campaigns are especially problematic in democratic systems, and there is a growing debate on how to address these issues without undermining the benefits of digital media. So I know that once I speak, I can speak forever, so I do not want to waste any more time. Without wasting any more time, I would like to introduce the Honorable Minister Ghana. Please join us and provide us with a keynote. Ghana, are you ready to come online?
Thank you, Program Director.
Thank you very much.
Greetings to the ZEDNA Board Chair, Ms. Palesa Ligoze, our ZEDNA CEO, Mr. Mulihe Wesi, executives and board members that will be coming in for their sessions over the next 2 days from BBI, from FPB, ICASA, Google, PAICTA, ISPA, ZACR, and many others that the CEO will thank individually on my behalf at the end of the conference. I especially recognize representatives from the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies. Ladies and gentlemen, the Internet Governance Forum is a global multi-stakeholder platform that facilitates the discussions of public policy issues pertaining to the Internet. It is a United Nations process that provides an open, multi-stakeholder and inclusive platform for dialogue and best practice sharing on public policy issues inherent to the governance, regulation, and development of the Internet. The Internet Governance Forum serves to bring people together from various stakeholder groups as equals in discussion on public policy issues relating to the Internet. While there is no negotiated outcome, the IGF informs and inspires those with policy-making power in both the public and private sectors. At their annual meeting, delegates discuss, exchange information, and share good practices with each other. This forum facilitates a common understanding of how to maximize Internet opportunities and address risks and challenges that arise. Program Director, this year's 16th annual IGF meeting will be hosted by the government of Poland in Katowice from the 6th to the 10th of December under the overarching theme, Internet United. The national IGF event with the theme, Digital Interdependence, ahead of the global event in December, is where we find ourselves this morning with ZEDNA and the ZA IGF that is now in its 6th year. As technologies emerge increasingly, they fundamentally change relationships between individuals and societies. And this creates new ways of connectivity. While it is welcomed, this interdependence also contributes to the increase of the digital divide. Universal human rights of inclusion and diversity that exist offline must also apply in the digital world. Digital interdependence brings a refreshing perspective for new ways of work and life as we undertake life in the new normal, but it is a cautionary tale as inclusion is a not negotiable. National and regional IGF initiative, NRIs, are organic and independent formations that discuss issues pertaining to Internet governance from the perspectives of their respective communities, while acting in accordance with the main principles of the global IGF. The ZA IGF annual event is aimed at strengthening linkages and collaborations amongst the relevant stakeholders in South Africa as a means of maximizing our country's benefit from the ever-growing digital economy. The audience of the ZA IGF consists of government, ICT community, business, research, academia, and civil society representatives, and most especially, people from previously disadvantaged communities. The ZAIGF's focus areas of discussion or theme for the next 2 days program director are education and access, universal access and connectivity, enhancing a multi-stakeholder approach, digital economy, unlocking the digital potential, disinformation and fake news, cybersecurity, IP and copyright, privacy and protection of personal information, critical resources, and many others that you have covered in your presentation. The forum also serves as a platform to solicit views on public internet policy issues. The ZA IGF Multi-Stakeholder Committee, Industry, APC, and ICT Research for Africa, Google, and many more have been consulted about the convening of the ZA-IGF in this regard. In planning and executing the program, the needs of the vulnerable groups must be taken into consideration, especially women, children, people with disability, and those from underprivileged communities. Every year, Program Director, there is an open call for submissions by the public for the theme of the conference. The call was opened between the 28th of December 2020 and the 31st of January 2021. And the global IGF community was invited to suggest issues for the IGF to prioritize in 2021, according to need, especially after a year of the impact of COVID-19. 507 submissions were received in total, with an overwhelming response from civil society being 50.2%, and the most common issue being inclusion of the 10 themes in total, closely followed by security and trust. Technical issues such as infrastructure development, or rather a lack thereof, the digital divide, data privacy, AI development and adoption are all critical areas of discussion and resolution. The IGF and NRI initiatives are expected to send written reports from the annual intersessional work activities, including the main annual event. All received reports are shared with the NRI's network and published on the IGF website. Community-driven intersessional activities and best practice forums have offered additional complementary platforms for multi-stakeholder dialogue on topical internet policy issues such as cybersecurity, gender and access, and local content, amongst others. The dynamic coalition of the IGF stands as an example of its successful efforts towards having continuous expert multi-stakeholder discussions on various issues pertaining to the internet and internet governance. Issues taken up by the dynamic coalitions include innovative approaches to connecting the unconnected, Internet of Things, network neutrality, platform responsibility, blockchain technologies, community connectivity, core internet values, gender and internet governance. More than 135 countries and regions have established firm IGF processes for their respective communities, and a high level of enthusiasm and activities, in addition to a growing number of national, regional, and youth IGFs, are a testament to the success of the IGF multi-stakeholder model. By increasing the linkages between the global IGF community and the NRIs, the IGF has also benefited tremendously through a bottom-up approach on issues pertaining to the internet governance and technologies. And these important collaborations between the IGF and the NRIs are showcasing how internet-related issues are different across countries and regions, implying that a relevant change can only be made if we all work together through an open and inclusive process. To the board, the executive, and our partners and stakeholders who will join us over the next 2 days, I want to extend my wishes of success for an impactful 6th ZA IGF. I also want to take this opportunity to say thank you to all who have put this event together, a platform to discuss and deliberate South Africa's digital and internet future. And my well wishes also goes to the elective conference that the program director has also spoken to. Thank you very much. Ke a leboga.
Thanks very much, Honorable Member, for the words of encouragement and also painting a clearer picture in terms of the internet governance landscape within the country and ensuring that everyone is able to take along this discussion, because I know that a lot of people they are not familiar with internet governance. I'm hoping also that we also have some newcomers who are also able to learn more about internet governance, what are the processes, what normally happens, the kind of discussions and elaborations that take place. But I'm very excited to be part of this IGF, looking at the agenda, because I think the topics that we have here, they are very engaging, very much relevant to the local digital landscape. And according to our agenda, our first session is around education and access. And as you know, that education is both a basic human right and a core element of the sustainable development. It is the theme of the United Nations 4th SDG, which seeks to ensure that inclusive, equitable, quality education and promoting lifelong learning opportunities for everyone. So education enables individuals to build a more prosperous and successful lives, and societies to achieve economic prosperity, social welfare, and justice. Therefore, the internet has a lot of potential in improving the quality of education, which is one of the pillars of sustainable development. So access to the internet with sufficient bandwidth, as mentioned, is very essential for the development of information society and the exercise of social and economic rights. So I would like to call on Lebogile, who's going to be our session moderator. Lebogile, can you confirm if you are here with us?
I am here. Thanks
very much, Lebogile. And then on our panel, I know initially we planned to have about 4 panelists, but I know that we have connector, Uyandisa. Uyandisa, can you confirm your presence?
Yes, I am available.
Thank you. And then we've got someone from Board Brand Infraco. Apologies for not remembering the name of the representative. Please forgive me for that. Can please the representative confirm they are present?
Yes, my name is Lebo Kekana.
Okay, Mr. Kekana, thanks very much. I'm not gonna forget you again, so I humbly apologize for that.
Okay, no problem, no problem.
We also intended to have USASA as part of this panel, but Peter, I know that we had someone from USASA who could speak on behalf of USASA, or we have someone from USASA. Can you please confirm? Because I don't think we have an EMISA. So we possibly have a panel of 3 with one moderator, which is Lebohile Malobiane. So Lebohile will introduce herself, and we'll also ask the panelists to also please introduce themselves before they speak. And please remember, after the presentations and the discussions have been made by the panelists, we will also open up the floor for anyone that has got questions or comments regarding the topic, which is around education and internet access. So the discussion is mainly centered around internet access as an enabler for acquisition of skills, knowledge, and information for marginalized communities and rural areas, especially during the pandemic. So we'll be looking at what has been done to improve the quality of access and online education, and what has been the successes and failures, and what are the recommendations moving forward for a better future. So just before I hand over to Gilebogile, I wanted to confirm with Peter. Peter, do we have someone who can speak on behalf of USASA?
Thanks, Tato. USASA sent an apology. They have their internal meeting. So the two panelists will continue. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Madavo. We'll be having Mr. Kekana. We'll also be having Ms. Sokanyide on our panel. The fact that we've got only two panelists, I think they should give us room to engage the topic with the moderator and also with the panelists. And I'm just going to hand over to Gilebogile for now. Gilebogile, you can take over. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are we all muted?
We can hear you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Good morning and good evening, good afternoon, whichever part of the world you are joining us from. My name is Gilebogile Molapiane. I'm the CEO for an entity called Africa Beyond the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So that's AB4IR in short. I will be moderating this first session where we are literally talking about internet access as an enabler for the acquisition of skills, knowledge and information from marginalized communities and rural areas. This is especially during the pandemic that we've all been accustomed to, that we've all been shoved and pushed into, and what can be done to improve quality of access and online education. We know our situation in South Africa. What has been done, and what are the successes and failures to date, and how can we learn and have recommendations? So thank you kindly, Ndadem Fikwe. Thank you to the CEO and the board members. Mepingi Gekana, thank you ever so much for your presence and always willing and available to share yourselves with us in such platforms. We've shared a couple of platforms where we're discussing the access of internet for our communities. So before I delve a bit more on myself, I am joined by Ntatele Boho Kekana. Are we related with the Deputy Minister? Maybe we need to declare. Do we have anything to declare? Should I have people signing stuff?
No, not at all. I was actually thinking about it last night, and then I was saying maybe there should be a disclaimer.
Order, Gilebogile, order.
Okay.
Yeah, no. Actually, I'm actually meeting her for the first time via Zoom.
Okay, so great. No conflict to declare.
No conflict of interest. No deployment of anyone.
And Miss Yandisa Sokanyile, if I could just please request each of you, Mr. Leboho, to provide a brief introduction of yourself.
Is it ladies first?
Okay. Yes, let's start with the ladies.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's my pleasure being here. All protocol observed. Firstly, my name is Yandisa Sokanyile. I am from Connector. Connector is a company that builds wireless networks, and we also build platforms to enable value-added services. So we basically built the networks from high site down. We do RF planning, and we operate mainly in the telco space. So we believe that internet connectivity and Wi-Fi is a road that allows people to drive all the other value-added services. So we build platforms for those value-added services as well. So we work with different stakeholders. We believe in partnerships to actually enable the rollout of internet access. We build free Wi-Fi hotspots in different areas, churches, and public transport hubs to allow our people to be able to connect for free, because we understand the value of having access to internet and what that can enable. We are based in Johannesburg. We operate nationally and in the SADC region as well. And yes, I'm looking forward to engaging with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yandi. Dr. Lebogo?
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, my name is Lebogo Kekana. I'm a senior engineer at Broadband Infraco. I think a little bit about myself. I've got about 20 years experience in ICT. I've actually worked for the likes of Arabia.com, those who are old enough. I've worked for Cisco Systems as well. And then one of the other companies which I've actually worked for is Accenture. So I work for Broadband Infraco, and those who don't know, Broadband Infraco is a state-owned entity, which is actually playing an important role in the data communication space. We are a wholesale carrier, so basically making sure that all those underserved areas or marginalized areas, especially in the rural areas, which do not have actual connectivity, we make an effort to actually make sure that those areas are connected. So one of our important projects, which we actually embarking on with in conjunction with CETA and Department of Communication, is the SA Connect. So that project will actually enable us to actually connect more schools in the future. And then there's an important part which, as Broadband Infraco, we're actually playing to make sure that the rural areas or the child in the rural area going forward is not actually left behind. We've actually seen that the pandemic has actually exposed the fact that when everything was shut down, the rural areas were really, really affected in terms of infrastructure. Only the urban areas could actually, some of the urban areas could actually be able to continue with the schooling online. And then we're saying that this thing should actually come to an end, whereby a child in the rural area is always marginalized. So the infrastructure should actually be there to actually afford everyone connectivity going forward. Thank you.
Thank you kindly. So we're discussing this issue around the internet and access. And maybe to provide a bit of background as well about where I am. I'm currently running this incubator called A4IR, as I have alluded, and it is also premised on the apparent digital and gender divide that is there in the communities. So it is said that in sub-Saharan Africa, mobile technology has evolved rapidly, but this has not happened to internet access, where we have over 170 million users of internet penetration in Africa. It is at least 18%, right? Which is significantly lower than the global average of the 30% that everybody else is experiencing. We've realized that when there is connectivity and there is all these different issues that are being built of infrastructure, the urban areas seems to be the ones that are prioritized, where we so much as overlooking the rural communities. How can we, or what has been the progress from each of your organization's side? I mean, We have issues of infrastructure that we cannot run away from, where especially schools are concerned. We're saying that education and access to information is a human right. And I like what Dadim Fikwe said earlier on, that there was a time where I do remember in the 70s, electricity seemed like such a luxury, you know, and we've moved on, and now we get surprised when somebody says they don't have electricity. And same is applying now with internet, where it used to be that, wow, you have internet. Now the question is, wow, you don't have internet, yet we're still faced with the glaring digital divide. So coming back to you as well, Ms. Yandisa, can you please take us through what it is that Connector is doing to deal with this digital divide, to work with schools, and how do you see us catching up? Because I feel like in South Africa, that is what we have been doing, is what we are doing. We keep playing the catch-up game. So what has Connector been doing? The progress to date, and what's your vision around that?
Thank you so much, Kilabokhile. Firstly, this is a very important discussion to have, and I am glad that we do have the likes of BBI, as they play mainly in the marginalized communities. So as Connector, we're an SMME. So with any business, you always look, we are for profit. We do our services also as part of the business. We also do the social responsibility, which is the part where we do the free Wi-Fi. So our strategy is, as we go and deploy the networks, whether it's for our clients or it's the networks that we do roll out, we always make sure in any area there is a way that we can have an impact in the society. This is, if we are rolling a network, then we're able to identify places where we can have free hotspots. And because of the cost of infrastructure for this industry, you find that as small businesses, we cannot go as far as we want to go. So basically, we rely on work that we get, and also on the partnerships that we can be able to build. One of the partnerships that we have built is with the Department of Transport, where we are deploying these hotspots within the transport hubs like taxi ranks. We do have one in Alex, and we've had over probably close to 100,000 sessions happening there. And the monetary value of that has been over 5 million within 3 months, where we say if the people of Alexandra had to pay for that Wi-Fi, if they had to pay for either Wi-Fi or data, this is how much it would have costed them. But because they are using public transport and they spend a lot of time in those taxi ranks, so we give them free Wi-Fi because we understand a person that's using public transport is either going to work, it's going to school, going to an interview, or doing shopping. So once you can give them access to internet, or they can be able to do research, look for work, and do all of the other activities because they're already spending enough time, maybe 30 minutes to an hour on a daily basis. So that is an enabler for that child who's doing research, who has research to do. So now they have that time that they can kill and doing something productive. And even in our advertising and marketing, we say, go on, look for that job. So we're not just promoting them to be on social media, but you give them ideas of what they can do while they're there. And the second part is also, I think, the internet education. So educating our people on what to do with the internet, because we can have this in-network infrastructure, and if the engagement is just social media, it defeats the purpose. So people also need to know, once they get access to this internet, what does that mean for them? What opportunities can that bring? What can they do? So we can't just put infrastructure and leave it and hope people that they will be able to connect. And also the educating people how to connect. There's always the assumption that everybody is tech savvy, they'll find and they'll look for an SSID, find it, get connected. But people still need to be educated. So when I also look at the education part, it's the educating the person, the mindset, giving them the knowledge of what this internet can do to them, the opportunities that it can bring. And then there's the curriculum education, which is for the Department of Education, the schooling. And I believe that it's not just only the schooling where it's a primary or high school or tertiary students. Education is an online, it's a lifetime situation now. And with the reskilling and the upskilling and the jobs of the future, everybody needs to be taking a course either way. So that is just not limited to only schoolgoers. So in that space, we are deploying Wi-Fi hotspots at churches, because for Black communities, we need to be realistic. Most of our people we find at the churches, especially in the townships, everybody goes to the church, or they will still be using public transport. So this is where we identify, this is where we're gonna get the influx of the people. And the good thing about our strategy of going to churches is that the church is sort of a community structure. And people have so much respect for the church, and you hardly find that churches are being vandalized because it's not seen as a government infrastructure. And there's still the perception of vandalizing government infrastructure that we know about. So the church becomes a center of development, a center of some excellence where the community, the children, the parents can be able to go to churches and have access to internet. So that opens up that school barrier where it's only limited to schoolgoers, or you have to be a student or a scholar at this particular school to go. So we are catering for the entire community, because you want to educate the mother, you want to educate the school leaver or the unemployed person to have access as well. So this is why we are targeting these public spaces, because we understand the value and we want to reach a broader market. And I believe that if we can educate also the parents to understand, then we can talk about cybersecurity. Because if the parent doesn't know, have never had access to internet, they don't even know what cybersecurity is. You'll find that children are sitting online playing games, and you start telling the parents won't be involved because they have no access to that. They have no way. And once you get people connected, internet access is just the basic. And that enables a lot of other digital economy and a lot of other opportunities, other different sectors that can actually leverage on that. But the base has to be the internet connectivity. Once we can get that right, then we're able to talk every other thing, the Internet of Things, the software development, the application development, and all of that, because the base is actually covered. And internet education also is just as important. People need to understand what is this internet we're talking about? What is the value of that? What is that gonna do to their lives? And how is that gonna improve their lives before they can actually buy into everything else? The last part, when it comes to the infrastructure, it's not a government issue. I think government just makes the environment conducive for companies like us, for societies, for organizations, for public sector to thrive. But the role government is just to open up. You know, I like that BBI is doing the program that they're doing, the SA Connect with the department. But there should be an integration between the private sector, the SMMEs and government, where if there is a rollout of infrastructure in a certain area, because you see Department of Transport is rolling their own fiber, this one is rolling their own fiber within the same department, there's lots of fiber. If you can scan the ground, there's a lot of fiber going. But because there is no integration, we're not talking to each other, you're not aware what is available. So if government rolls out, give it to, do the partnerships and say, companies can come in and utilize that to roll out in a certain area. So there has to be a more integrated strategy within the role players, whether it's the telcos, it's the government, it's the SMMEs, to say, if a certain telco is already operating in the space, how can that allow the SMMEs or government to tap into that existing network without building an entire or a complete network, because it's costly. So I think this is where I feel we need to work more on, so that we don't keep on duplicating the same, but find a way of integrating and find a way of working and understanding who's got network in a certain area that we can be able to tap into. You know, we are growing into areas in other places like Zimbabwe and other countries. So it's always that, let's start and make it work, because the cost of deployment is actually high. So government can play a certain role and then bring in corporates. We've got corporates, multinationals in this country, telcos who are making a killing. How do we then hold them responsible to say, in your CSI, please ensure that you are able to connect more communities, because those communities being connected are gonna enable other industries to actually operate and function. Thank you.
You have raised such valid points, and I think I absolutely concur and appreciate you raising that infrastructure is not a government issue. It is everybody's issue. So we need to definitely see how we can pull ourselves together. You've mentioned bringing private sector, government, and SMME in a partnership of some sort, and holding everybody, each other accountable for the development of this thing. Because sometimes I find that we as a nation are also working against our own progress, in a sense that, yes, now here's the next step, that we need to bring in fiber and make sure people are connected. But then just last week there was riots and we burned down the school. So now we have to go back and build up the school and get to the next point. So it is everybody's business. And that's the point that I really like, that I wanted to re-emphasize as well. Thank you for that. So Ntadelebo, we're talking infrastructure, we're talking what you call the 3 hotspots that Ms. Yandisa just mentioned. But still, somehow, as a person coming from the rural communities, I'm thinking, I still don't feel included. I don't feel like I'm accessing those hotspots that have been put out by connectors. So how do I get roped in from a rural area perspective? I mean, the pandemic really did show us just how far apart this divide is. So how do we put in the rural areas into perspective? How do we get them to play along with other kids? How do we get those kids that still are crossing rivers to get to schools, to get them to understand some of these issues that Ms. Yandisa spoke about? Because really explaining to people how the internet works, what cybersecurity is, comes second nature to you and me, because we deal with it every day. We have Wi-Fi in our homes. But how do we explain to that child that still has to cross the river to go to school, that still goes to school under a tree, about infrastructure? How do we make sure that as we are moving, we don't leave them that far behind? So you've been with aradia.com, Cisco, and Accenture, as you mentioned. So you come with all the wealth of knowledge. How do you put all of that together and bring in the rural areas?
Okay, I think the important thing is actually just to focus on, I think I will actually answer your question towards the end. But I think for the audience who are not actually aware what BIBA is doing within the ambit of SA Connect, I think I should actually be highlighting very, very important things which we're doing. So we are in a partnership with CETA, as I've indicated. Our role is actually that of a carrier. So within SA Connect, we're not only connecting schools, we're actually connecting other government entities, for instance, the health, police, and tuition centers. So basically, the tuition centers which are actually run by Department of Labor. So with regard to how that the traffic which is actually coming from those entities gets actually backhauled by Broadband Infraco, we actually work with SMMEs which are actually providing the access portion. So in most of these areas, we actually go an extra mile to empower the SMMEs to actually get involved in making sure that the last mile connectivity is actually coming from them. So we're not like as a carrier, we're not only focusing on making sure that we're actually doing everything end to end. I think the other effort is actually making sure that those areas we actually make the SMMEs that get involved, and then whatever the children in those areas can actually learn from getting involved is actually very key to us as well. So the other important thing is that in an effort to actually making sure that the whole program is actually becomes successful, we need to actually make sure that the cost of data is actually addressed. BBI, CETA, and other stakeholders can actually make sure that there's infrastructure connectivity. But at the end of the day, we're not internet service providers. We actually just backloading that traffic, handing it over to service providers. So the role of the regulator is actually very key in that regard, making sure that the data is actually affordable to the children in the rural areas. I know during the pandemic or during the lockdown, there's actually been efforts by ICASA to make sure that some of the content is actually zero rated. So to actually make sure that this adoption of this infrastructure going forward, we need to actually make sure that post the pandemic, the regulator comes on board, talks to the traditional service providers to actually make sure that data is actually affordable going forward. I think the other important element is actually with regard to teacher training. It's actually very important for us for this infrastructure which we are rolling out, for it to actually be adopted. We need to make sure that our teachers understand how all the systems which we are putting out actually work. Because if let's say maybe they don't know how to actually use these systems, those systems will be neglected, and then the whole effort will actually be result in wasteful expenditure going forward. And then the other thing which you're actually seeing is actually the trend of security. We're seeing a lot of vandalism, which has actually affected some of the areas where we've actually rolled out infrastructure. So that's where education comes into play as well, educating the communities to actually make sure that they actually understand the role of the infrastructure which the government is rolling out, and then the benefit to the community. So in an effort to actually eliminate vandalism and that theft of equipment. I think the other important, very key thing, as much as we're actually rolling out this infrastructure, technical support is actually very key to actually make sure that there's availability of this infrastructure throughout the year. It's actually pointless to actually have this infrastructure which is actually time and again it's not available for the children to use because of the fact that no one can actually be able to actually support this infrastructure. At Broadband Infraco, in conjunction with CETA, we do have a skilled people who are actually placed in our network operation centers. So, and then we do make sure an effort to actually make sure that most of these entities which we are connecting, when they need support, we are in a position to support them. So remember, Broadband Infraco is actually giving what we call a fixed connectivity. So there's another element of mobile connectivity, which we need to actually start taking more care of. At this point in time, the spectrum is only limited to a certain players. And then it's actually very important for the spectrum to actually be opened up so that more players can actually come into play. And then hopefully we'll actually start seeing lots and lots of players targeting the rural areas and making sure that the child in the rural area is not neglected.
Awesome. I will request as well from the participant side, please do make note in the Q&A section and also in the comments. If you have any questions, please do write them down and we'll take them. We do note, I did note there that you wish that Ikasa could have been here, but they will be here, I think, tomorrow, if my memory serves me well. And the sitters, we were supposed to have USASA and NEMISA as part of this as well, but unfortunately they were not available. So it would have been nicer to have more people to discuss this. But please, if you have questions, do put them in the chat. And yes, Lebahang, I do see you. There is a lot of vandalism in the internet infrastructure, especially in schools. We like the idea of connecting churches as well. Maybe vandalism issue can be addressed. That is very much noted. There was a quote here that I saw by Isaac Mina who says, all South Africans, and especially those who cannot afford it, and other vulnerable groups need a daily first tranche of free internet access to exercise their basic human rights, such as access to government services, participating in the digital economy, looking for jobs, online communication, and for learners and students to access online educational resources. This is the only way to achieve universal access to information and digital equality amongst our citizens, including the rural poor who have access to mobile phones. And I thought that was so very powerful, because at this point in time, one of the things that we seem to be overlooking is that everybody seems to have a mobile phone. That is one of the access that we can get through to help them get closer to the, to the space, the digital space. We were still bringing on and talking more around how we can include the rural areas. Let's perhaps move on to online, specifically education. And it doesn't necessarily have to be what each of the organizations, Connector and BBI are doing, but as much as what you think could be done and opportunities that are there that could be blindsided that we are not seeing. How can we help to catch up on online education? Whether we like it or not, we are right in the middle of it. How do we deal with online education? Ms. Yandi, you can go first.
Okay. I've touched on the education part earlier on, and it's a critical element, because right now, as you say, we are in the middle of a pandemic that has just forced us into the digital world. We have to, I think it's also a multi-stakeholder approach. You know, everybody needs to play a part. I last year, the other year, I actually attended an e-learning summit in East London, where there were teachers from rural communities, especially in the Eastern Cape. They all had tablets. They were saying that, yes, we had tablets. Yes, there was infrastructure. Talking about vandalism, it was vandalized, or maybe it's no longer working, which is now the ongoing technical support that has just been raised as an issue. That teachers didn't know how to use these tablets. They were talking about a fourth industrial revolution that was going to come, and you could see that they were really interested and they wanted to learn, they wanted to know more, but there was no opportunity, or there was no one that actually was guiding them. The tablets were dropped. They might have received some sort of training, but they didn't know what to do more with these devices or these gadgets that they have. which is also another problem. People have got smartphones, but do they know the potential or the capabilities of the smartphone? Hence, it says if you've got access to internet, do you know what you can do with that? So this is part of the online education. I think after attending that summit, I went to Mhlobo Wenene FM. We started a show every Monday. I unpack 4IR in Xhosa and break it to the simplest terms and the simplest forms. It's been almost 2 years now. We're running that every Monday, and we give them opportunities and what that they can do. The growth I've seen within a number of the followers, or the listeners is just so much. So wherever we are, with the opportunities that we have, with the platforms that we have, if you have knowledge to share, just educate, find a way. There's so many different ways of reaching out to the people. So my belief is like anywhere that you are and you can open up a door or just share knowledge with people, that's very important. That's a first way that we can grow. So education doesn't necessarily have to be the traditional education way. Then coming to the education system, last year, together with the Internet Society Gauteng chapter, we did a content creation on training. We did it online on Zoom for marginalized communities. We had 4 provinces: Eastern Cape, Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and then we had Gauteng. So these mainly rural communities. Some have never been on Zoom. You had to teach them how to get on Zoom and first explain what Zoom is. There are things that we take for granted when we're sitting in where we're sitting. But for other people, that's just, there's so much education that needs to be done first. So we took them through that whole process. And after the end of the session, because people have smartphones, what can you do with that smartphone? We gave them tools of how to use that smartphone to actually create content, document what is happening in your communities, storytelling. We've got so much culture, we're rich in culture, in tradition. There's so much information that is sitting there that is not online. So that was another opportunity to say, you can take your smartphone and document your culture, your area. And we had people starting out their online TV stations, channels, podcasts, YouTube channels. They are doing movies now. Some are even winning awards from the program. People that have never had any exposure to this sort of, training. So the importance of education, just educating people outside just the curriculum space where it's schoolwork. Coming back to schools, there is no other way. The people have to have access to connectivity at home or either at the school. The cost of data, and I know a lot of websites have been zero rated, especially educational content. So if we can have more of educational website being zero rated, that can be even for let's say upskilling. We're talking about jobs of the future. The workers, we know it is changing. There's so much. So education is not just only for school goers, it's for everyone. So if we can have more of those websites that are offering critical skills training, also being zero rated, I think that could actually help. But the connectivity within the schools, I think this is a role that BBI plays, and they're doing an amazing job in it. So we need probably trainers now that can come in, train the teachers. They've got the devices, they've got the connectivity, they don't know. And for older people, it's so difficult to say, I don't understand, because these children now are so tech savvy than us or our parents or the teachers. So first start with the teacher, train the trainer. So we need more training on the technologies before we even deploy the networks. We need more technical training also. Train people within the area, within the school. The school has to have a tech guy or whoever, that's going to look after. When things go wrong, there should be somebody that is available there, so that we don't have infrastructure that gets built and then it gets redundant after some time. And also talking about the redundancy of the infrastructure, there are programs that government is doing. SMMEs will get probably a tender or a contract where it's supported by government for a certain period, maybe it's 3 years. What happens after the 3 years? I think the continuity plan, maybe BBI can dwell into that. But there has to be a way that even the SMMEs that get the business, they need to be trained on continuity instead of relying on government only as your sole provider or as your source of income. How do you expand to get into corporates and to get into communities so that your pool is bigger, so you don't just sit with one client, because when that contract ends, or there has to be a continuity process. So these are some of the things that we do in terms of the innovation. What else can you do to generate revenue over your Wi-Fi network? So if you're providing a Wi-Fi network, what are the revenue generation models that you can actually implement? So there's so much education, and it's such an interesting time, and it presents a huge opportunity where we can just train our people on technical skills, get the children connected, and make sure there's sustainability. And somehow we have to teach our people to remove the notion that anything that is government needs to be vandalized. We've seen the 5G stories, we've seen this globally. There's so much education that still needs to be done, just for people to understand the importance of that infrastructure, what that 5G network is actually going to do and enable them, instead of thinking and all of the other things, but think, how do I participate in a 5G era? What can my business do? So we need to also start with where we are sitting. What does that look? What does the innovation process look like for the next 5 years, for the next 10 years? Let's start our R&D right now, because we know where the future goes. And also just for government to say, once we release the spectrum, this is what it means. These are the opportunities that can come, and just break that information in the most simplest and basic terms, so that anyone who's not even tech savvy or understand the telco language can actually know what it is, or maybe have more engagement sessions like these, where we can unpack the opportunity that lies ahead, so that everybody can participate, and make sure that we bring in all the stakeholders and they can be able to talk on the part that they do. I can talk from our side as a business, and from where we sit, we're seeing things. Government will also talk from their side, and everybody's got a side to play. But once we bring our different views together, we can actually come up with one, conclusive plan that can help us grow, because things are different on the ground. I always say, if you're sitting in the boardroom and you're making decisions, it's completely different when you start the work. When you go to areas, you're seeing something completely different. So let's start from there and have the discussions on Zoom, have the discussions in the boardroom, but let's get on the ground. Let's talk to the people. Let's understand the actual problems, because we cannot make decisions on behalf of people. I've always seen people talking about rural community development and research and what they're doing. And then you ask, have you been to a rural area?
Yes. So there's someone asking here, and I think you did touch on it a bit, but there's a question asking, you're talking about training and digital skilling. Then what would be the role, if any, of Department of Basic Education, the National Education Collaboration Trust, and NEMISA in facilitating this?
Great. These are the stakeholders. I thought we would have some of them in this conversation. So I think NEMISA is already doing the training. From a government perspective, I would love government to speak on behalf of themselves. And they've got their own processes. We work differently. But these are the right stakeholders. If they can talk more, if the Department of Telecommunications says, we are rolling out this network in this place, education come, NEMISA come, do the training on the teachers so that everything is collaborated. We are all going in the same direction. You don't have training on digital skills where there's no internet access. So a strategy like that, where the departments can speak to each other, collaborate, the effort must be collaborated. So when there's rollout, there must be training, there must be tools, there must be all of that. So it all goes in the same way. I think from that angle, that would actually work.
Thank you. Ntate Lebogo, there's a question here, and I think maybe against your SA Connect program. Dade Johannes Mofokeng says what is missing for him, which is a research concern, is a lack of properly contextualizing what is connecting schools or e-education or internet in schools or online schooling. So he wants to know what is properly contextualizing the connectivity there. These are 4 distinct paradigm shifts with different outcomes. It's not a one size fits all, we agree. Against this paradigm, which would the SA Connect be covering?
Okay.
About the SA Connect, it's general, but I'm just saying maybe against the backdrop of the SA Connect that you are offering.
Yeah, so we as I indicated, our responsibility is actually more on the connectivity infrastructure. But it's actually very, very important that when the infrastructure is available for use, there's other stakeholders which come on board. For instance, we need Department of Education to actually come on board. Let me actually maybe just share a scenario which I actually think will actually work much better. For instance, if you actually take Gauteng, I know Gauteng is not a good example because of the fact that they are well resourced. But I think maybe that template is actually very good for other areas, the rural areas as well. Gauteng, we've got municipalities, big municipalities, the likes of Ekurhuleni, the likes of Joburg, the likes of Tshwane, which have got fiber infrastructure. And then there's a very good need for that infrastructure to actually be interconnected. So I think the wrong approach in those areas is actually to actually have a fragmented approach in terms of with regard to things like content and or education. So that's where the important it's actually important for provincial government to actually play a role. And then I can actually see that Department of Education in Gauteng is actually making those efforts to actually make sure that the schools in the Gauteng area have got connectivity, the content is the same. So basically then for other areas as well, as much as broadband infrastructure is actually rolling out this infrastructure, provincial entities from education space need to actually come on board to actually make sure that there's a standardized content providers to make sure that the children in those provinces, all of them can actually access almost the same education from these service providers. So there's a lot of work which actually needs to be done outside what broadband infrastructure is actually doing to actually make sure that at the end of the day, education can actually succeed in the rural areas.
Awesome, thank you for that. I hope you are answered. That's Fiso. On the issue of duplicate infrastructure, I like the comment that you are making, suggestion. You're saying let's start collaboration within the spheres of government. Eskom, Transnet, PRASA, broadband infraco, telecom and municipalities have fiber that can be used to fast track connectivity in the rural areas. Let's walk the talk on collaboration and stop competing with each other. This is the point that Ms. Yandi was making earlier on in terms of duplication. We're duplicating so much resources, whereas we could be playing relay. I am told there is somebody from ICASA in attendance, and maybe if they're available and we could unmute them, they could give us just like a brief overview from their point of view, because they're very much relevant in this discussion that we are having. I also saw some time ago on the universal access to the internet and free public access in South Africa. It was a study that was done. There's a seven-point implementation plan that was outlined. And these are points that we have been alluding to all throughout our discussion this morning. They're talking free public access at government sites, zero-rated access to government websites, not just that, but so many other things. And in this case, school-related kind of download. If you want to download an old question paper, there should be zero-rated access. Free Wi-Fi as a municipal basic service, daily tranche of free internet access, digital literacy programs, which have also been indicated, minimum standards for the provision of free access, oversight, and monitoring. One of the things that we have also very much spoken to is the fact that our data is very expensive. We need to get around that somehow. And Dr. Mafiko, are we getting the ICASA person? Hello?
I'm actually not sure who we have from ICASA right now. But Peter can confirm on the other side. Peter?
All right, so in the audience, yeah.
Thank you, colleagues. The ICASA person that is here was not meant to address those questions. I'm just afraid that it might not be a relevant person to speak to, considering that ICASA has got different departments. So we might get a wrong person. So I'll propose let's just engage it further without just pulling somebody, without even verifying the relevancy of the content. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, that is fair. So, do we have any more questions from the platform, from the attendees? Any question that has not been answered as we are about to wrap up?
Ms. Moderator, I see Mr. Philemon raise his hand. He's from ICASA. I think he wants to address other issues. If you may please give him time.
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, the Honorable DM, as well as the colleagues, all protocol observed. I've been invited to the forum, but only for the second session. So there were some issues raised with respect to spectrum, or the release of spectrum, as alluded to by our colleague from BBI. So in terms of the release of spectrum, because of the relevance which I want to contribute to in terms of the topic, is with respect to the provision of broadband services during the pandemic. So what I wanted to share with the forum as a contribution is that ICASA has released temporary spectrum. And then in terms of the licenses that were issued to the operators, certain obligations or license obligations were imposed. And then amongst those obligations, it was connectivity to schools and provisioning of virtual classrooms. And then that was done in conjunction with the Department of Basic Education. And then in terms of those licenses which were issued, the operators are obliged to continue to maintain the quality of service that have been provided to the consumers, especially the schools, even post COVID-19 pandemic. Just to add and give some input there. Although I'm not part of this panel, I'll be part of the next panel, session 2. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you kindly for sharing. I see Mepingi as well has her hand up. You can go, Deputy Minister.
Thank you very much, Moderator. I think it will be important, especially for BBI and USASA, having seen how exposed we were as a country, especially the disparities between rural and urban in as far as connectivity is concerned. The need for them to come swiftly, and I know there's financial implications, but Kikana knows there's a second phase. They talk of the second phase of the rollout to schools. Our communities can't wait any longer. And all of us come from rural areas. It will be a serious indictment on our side if we don't rise to the occasion and make sure that we roll up our sleeves and deal with the connectivity for little ones at school. I mean, the whole notion of IDTVs, I mean, it's an egg on our face as well from USASA's side. So we can't really delay some of this any longer. So we really need to come together and make sure that certain things do happen, including the commitment that the president has done. I mean, if we don't move swiftly on some of these things, becomes a blow for our minister. It will also become a serious indictment for the president, let alone all of us who are below them. So let's roll up our sleeves, guys, and make sure.
So obviously, going into the self-assessment, I want to
colleagues, may I request that we all switch off our mics if we're not speaking? We are disturbing.
I want to join the meeting
We are affecting the sessions because of the interruptions that we're making from our private discussion. Can we please be on mute and let the panelist and the moderator continue wrapping up? I thank you.
Oh God, thank you so very much. Points have been made and noticed, and we are about to wrap up now. And I thank everybody that has been a part of this. So, Ms. Yandi, I will start with you yet again in your parting shot. And I've noted there is a question. In fact, maybe before I do that, there was a question that's asked about most teachers consider these so-called digital initiatives as being ambiguous. This was the point that was covered earlier on by Ms. Yandi, where she was also saying we need to have a training of trainers for teachers, because too often teachers are thrown in the deep end, expected to know everything, and too often they don't. So we seem to be missing that training, overlooking that. So yes, there is also TVET colleges. There's a TVET college program, and I'll speak to this a bit more in my closing remarks. So I would like to just go to you yet again, Ms. Yandi, in your closing shot with regards to our discussion today, access to internet in the marginalized communities, especially with schools, and wrapping up in everything else that you have said. What would be your parting shot to the delegates?
Hi, thank you so much once again. It's been a great conversation. And I think from our side and from my side personally, I still really believe that the opportunity that internet access brings to our people is just phenomenal. And if we drag our feet, or if we don't collaborate and work fast enough, we will do what you said we are doing, the catching up game. One of the things that we need to really understand is to look at our country, look at our strengths and our weaknesses. We are a rural country, so most of our communities are in the rural areas. We need to be able to work out a plan to actually get them connected. And I still say it's not just the role of government to bring connectivity, it's a multi-stakeholder approach. So we need to have these constant engagements. We need to hold the telcos accountable. They need to put more on their CSI in terms of rolling out this infrastructure. There's a lot of corporate companies, and I still believe if we put internet access as a human right, So a lot of corporates needs to come into party, because the cost of infrastructure, it's not a cost that government alone can actually carry. Education is critical. You know, people need to understand what they can do with access to internet. And we need to get on the ground and really understand the problems that people are facing in the different areas as we roll out. And lastly, the collaboration is important, as somebody also said, with the different departments, because once you have internet access, all of the other departments can actually benefit. So we don't want a situation where each department is rolling out their own infrastructure. So the silo mentality needs to end, especially within government. So governments need to start talking to each other and also bringing all the other stakeholders together, because with a infrastructure rolled out by a Department of Telecommunications, it can benefit transport. There's no need for PRASA to be rolling out another infrastructure. So let's look at the resources that we are looking at. Maybe we need to have just an integrated network plan for the country, so that we can all see what is available, what access is there, so that the different parties or stakeholders can know where to tap into. And also technical training is critical. So once government deploys networks, we need to make sure that they don't get redundant, they don't get vandalized. So educating the communities before going to the communities is actually important, so that they see the value of that high site that is being put in their area. Yes, so that's basically what I can say. So if anything, you know, integrated approach is important. Education, opportunities, people need to know what the opportunities the internet access can actually bring to them.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Dadele Boho?
Tateli Woko just mentioned that he's unable to connect. He can't hear anything for now.
Okay. So while I am thanking, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, you please proceed.
Yeah, we're thanking everybody for tuning into this particular session. There are key things that have been raised that we cannot get around from. It is education, education, and more education. My mother always said, little knowledge is very dangerous. And like you rightfully said, yes, we have handphones, we have smartphones rather, but do we even know what they are capable of doing? You know, the integrated approach I am for. In fact, I mentioned earlier on that I am with an incubator called AB4IR. We are situated in Mabopane at the Tshwane South TVET College. And hence I said I'll speak more to TVET colleges. One of the integrated approaches that we could consider, that we could look at, is using the TVET colleges, because they are right in the heart of communities where it's easier. I speak issues of access, then there is security, but then you have a great pipeline of people that can access the facilities and be able to get education and access and interact with this fire that we're talking about. And I'm about to stand up so I can just show you around the kind of facilities that can be set up. So this right here is the common space where they can come, because not all people have the resources. Then they come and they're able to use the space, and they're able to be integrated into this space that we are talking about, and fire and not leaving them far behind. We're a gaming and animation incubator in particular, but we are set up in the heart of the community. This speaks to access. This speaks to people being able to see what they don't know. We bring in teachers as well. I liked the element of teaching the teachers. We are trying to talk to telcos. How do we zero rate this? Because if we're bringing it to the disadvantaged, previously marginalized, we can't package it in the same way that we have packaged it for those that seemingly are able to do what needs to be done. So for my own parting shot, we are in agreement. There's still a digital divide. There is still a lot that still can be done to address the digital divide. But there are bits and pieces of things that we can do. And there's an integrated effort that is required. We need to hold each other accountable. And we are living in such a great space, a great time, like really what a time to be alive, where we have ministers and deputy ministers and a president that is so forward thinking, that is willing to put resources into what we think can work. So it is just that integrated effort that we need to consciously bring to the table to say, Mr. President, Deputy Minister, thank you as well for being here, and charging you to charge us as well in developing our communities, one community at a time. And TVET colleges are but a really good vehicle that we are overlooking, that we could use, that we could work through. So I thank you everybody for the opportunity. Yes, you can come through, we can arrange for a site visit. We can have more discussions around this. I'm totally available and looking forward to doing my bit in empowering the communities, because as well, one of the things that we overlook is bringing infrastructure to the communities that is less than what we would take to urban areas. So we consciously set up a proper facility here for access, for education, just to create a different narrative. From the bottom of my feet, I thank you, Ms. Yandisa, and I thank you, Ntatele Boho, in absentia. Thank you for the opportunity. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and wishing you the best of interactions for the next sessions. Thank you and have an awesome day. That's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Gile, also thanking our panelists and also the participant for also engaging on the topic. And according to our agenda, we should be having a 30-minute tea break. But allow me to take this opportunity to exercise a discretion that we go straight to session 2. And then after session 2, we will take that 30-minute break, because as much as we were talking about education and access in session 1, and now that we are going to session 2, we will be going into universal access and connecting the unconnected. It's similar, but it's not the same topic. Because with this particular session, one of the reasons we have this topic is because the issue of connectivity, as you might have heard, it is something that is a pressing and pertinent issue within the country, and it has been on the internet governance discussion over a long period of time. And as the committee, we felt it necessary to actually have more information in terms of the Universal Service and Access Fund, which was established under the Electronic Communications Act to fund programs and projects that strive to achieve universal access to all South Africans. Because when we're talking about universal access, it also encompasses a broadband that is available, accessible, relevant, and affordable. So for this particular session, we have Tutuzile Mkonazi, who's going to become our moderator. And on our panel, we have Ukonrad Lubster, is one of the wireless ISPs that is based in the Western Cape. I'm hoping that he's online, because I don't see his name, but I'm really hoping that he's online. And then we've got Mr. Molife from ICASA. I think we also have someone from the department. Maybe let me just start off by asking Tutu, are you ready to moderate the second session around universal access and connecting the unconnected before we can I can go further onto this topic? Thanks. Tutu? Are you there? Tutuzile, are you there? Yeah, it seems like we are missing Tutuzile on this call. Not sure what could be the issue here. But either way, we shall continue. And then I will just try and occupy the gap that is trying to emerge right now. But maybe just to talk briefly about community networks. Community networks basically are built and operated by local citizens who want to connect their own city or village. And community networks, they put the technology in the hands of the people who use it. And they bring new ideas, new ways of thinking, and the new solutions. And they provide a complementary solution for access and affordable connectivity in underserviced areas. And they inspire us to think differently and solve problems together. So I know that in South Africa within the continent, it's one country that has got a lot of community networks, although community networks, they span around the continent as a whole. And I can see that I'm also receiving some messages from Ututu, hoping that she's here. Tutu, can you hear me? Hello, Tutu. Maybe just check on your microphone if you are there. Yeah, it seems like we're still having some challenges with Tutuzile. So with universal access, we are trying to actually understand in terms of the universal access service and access fund, how it has been utilized, because it seems like operators and also licensees, they are basically supposed to be contributing less than 1% of the annual profits. I think it's 0.2 currently, to make sure that the demands for universal access and service are met. So we intend to hear and learn more about how the USEF has been utilized, and also get some updates in regard to spectrum developments, especially from the CASA side. Also bearing in mind that affordability and availability of access is a very, very serious challenge, especially during this COVID pandemic, as more people are now starting to carry on with their own lives. They're using online means. So maybe to check Mr. Molefe, you can maybe start off by introducing yourself in the meantime. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator, and good morning again, colleagues. My name is Philemon Molefe from ICASA. The main duties at ICASA is the licensing of spectrum, spectrum management, and including the compliance with the quality of service monitoring. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Molefe. And then I think we had Konrad Lobster. Konrad, are you there? Mr. Lobster, are you there? Yeah, it seems like we are having some issues with our panelists currently. So it's currently it's bringing some strain on the activities, because currently we only have Mr. Molefe for this panel. From the department, do we have anyone, Peter? Okay.
Yes, Moni.
Yes, continue.
Thanks. It's Peter Velo from the department. I'm not sure exactly who will be representing because I see our acting DG. It's also on the panel. So I think the administrators on the other side can confirm so that we know exactly who will be representing the department in this session. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much. Mr. Madabu, Moderator, can you please confirm? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. You are scheduled to be on this session. The acting DG will be on the next session, which is the enhancing a multi-stakeholder approach in South Africa, and she's available for that. You may proceed, Mr. Miller. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Mr. Mdavu, for the clarity. So, Mr. Milo, it seems like you'll be on this panel. So you can go ahead and introduce yourself, and then I will moderate the session. Thank you.
My video on.
The video is off, sir. We can see you. Thank you.
Oh, you can see me. Okay, thanks. Yeah. Morning, Deputy Minister, Director General, respective CEOs, and colleagues from respective organizations. I'm Peter Mello, the Chief Director in the ICT Infrastructure Support Branch within the Department of Communication and Digital Technologies. I have been in the ICT space sector for over 20 years, having implemented infrastructure projects of the likes of national, the likes of Vodacom, TNCLC, Telkom, and the other ISPs, emerging ISPs. And internationally, I have also project managed various projects, infrastructure projects, such as Australia, Vodafone, Germany, Vodafone, Brazil, Movitel, MTC Namibia, Vodacom, Tanzania, Mozambique, MTN, Uganda, MTN, Ghana, and the rest. The list goes on. So I've been in this space for some time, and I also have worked within the state-owned companies such as our Centec, and also have done a bit of consulting before I went back to the market. And currently, I'm with the department. As you are aware that we are a national department responsible for ICT policy developments and strategies. So that's who I am. Over to you, Moderator.
Thanks very much, Mr. Milo. I would like to request for the technical person to please unmute Tutum Kwanazi, because she is online. She's been sending me messages because it seems like she's not able to speak. Tutu, can you just post a message, please, on the chat so that the technical person can recognize you, because I cannot see your name here on the list of participants. Tutu? Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what could be the problem here, because Tutu's microphone and audio is fine, but it seems like we cannot hear her on the other side. So apologies for those inconveniences, but either way, let's just continue for now. So, as mentioned, this topic is around universal access and connecting the unconnected. Maybe to open up the discussion, it would basically be finding out from the panelists in terms of ICASA, because I know ICASA, they have a certain role that they play in regard to USF. Not sure, is it around determination of rates, or is it a collection of contribution from licensees and operators? But we wanted to understand what is the status of USF currently, and how has it been utilized, and what has been the successes and challenges experienced thus far. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. Is the question posed to ICASA? I think that falls under the ambit of USASA.
So,
yes.
Are you mentioning that USASA, ICASA has got no role to play in regard to the USF?
No, in terms of the USF moderator, ICASA, as part of the funds which are levied in terms of obligations with respect to the service licenses that have been issued to the operators, there is a portion of the funds which is been collected by USASA, so that it can enable the provision of electronic communication services to the under-service areas. But there is a link between USASA and ICASA in terms of ICASA imposing obligations to the licensees in an effort to support the universal service access.
Okay.
So that is mainly in terms of the fund itself, in terms of what the fund is being utilized for. It's been controlled by USASA.
Okay. Thanks very much, Mr. Monlefe. As much as we would have loved to hear directly from USASA, it's unfortunate that we do not have someone who can speak on their behalf. But it seems like we've got Tutuzile Mkonazi back. Tutuzile, can you hear us now?
Can you hear me, Tato?
Yes, we can hear you.
Awesome. See, now I'm even afraid of trying to switch on my video. Just now I have issues.
No, it's okay. I'll switch off my video, and then you can carry on with the discussion around universal access and connecting the unconnected, because the main discussion should be centered around what has been the successes, what are the challenges, and also looking at the issue of spectrum. What are the latest developments? Because we are also aware that community networks, they are finding it difficult to operate within the country because of limited institutional support. And I know that you are doing a lot of work around community networks within the country and also within the region itself. So I will hand over to you. We have Mr. Monlefe and Mr. Milo on this particular session. So,
is Rudolph on the call? Thank you so much, Tato. Is Rudolph on the call?
Yes. No, we don't have USASA on the call.
No, I'm saying Rudolph, Conrad.
No, Conrad, it seems like when you are busy moderating, I will try and find out what is happening to Conrad and see if I can get him online as soon as possible. Thanks.
Thank you, Tato. I suppose I'd have to reintroduce myself in order to save time and be very short. My name is Dudu Mkwanazi, and I am the moderator for this session this morning. I'm also a director of Uju Digital. We are an ICT SMME consulting business that works very closely with ISPs as well as community networks around an array of services. And I know Tato already started the session, but to just bring it back, I'll pose a question to you, Mr. Melo, that I know in the beginning of the COVID-19 that the department posted a survey or sent out a survey that would inform the impact of COVID-19 on digital economy master plan for South Africa. And a number of the SMMEs filled out that survey and sent it back to the department. How far is the department with this initiative? Peter? Can Peter hear me?
Yes, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Oh, thanks. Yes, you are quite right. In terms of the digital economy master plan, it was developed, and the department will be getting into the phase of implementation and obviously monitoring of that particular policy development. So we are in a process to develop the implementation plan. Maybe out of it, different programs that will enhance or ensure that it is completely implemented as planned or adhering and achieving the set targets. Over to you, Dudu.
Yeah, all right. Thank you, thank you. And while we're still on the department, the previous speakers did touch base to the SA Connect, and the Deputy Minister did highlight the fact that the project is now should be on the second phase. However, the timelines were affected of phase 2 of SA Connect were affected by the COVID national disaster states. But I suppose the question then is there a directive on when phase 2 will kick off? And does phase 2 give a focus on underserved community and its capacity to offset subsidies for low-income users, and particularly with attention to community networks when rolling out phase 2 of SA Connect? Peter, you're muted.
Oh, thank you, Dudu. Maybe let me just bring this particular picture so that participants are aware of the program, the SA Connect program in its entirety. You'll remember that the implementation approach was based on 2 phases, which is the phase 1 of the SA Connect, the phase 2. The phase 1 was agreed upon by cabinet to fast track or a pilot broadband connectivity in the country in the 8 district national health insurance programs. Basically, the rollout was focused in the 8 district municipalities where National Health Department was piloting their NHI programs. And those municipalities exclude Gauteng and Western Cape. Now, initially, the target was to connect 6,135 government facilities. The government facilities we are referring to the schools, as we know that 75% of those facilities are schools, health facilities, ports, municipal buildings, social service centers, post offices, South African police service centers, etc., etc. Now, due to funding challenges or some budget cuts along the deployment of the program, we couldn't connect the entire 6,135. Therefore, the focus was then put on the 970, or the program could only fund connectivity to the 970 sites. But now the connectivity in this regard doesn't only talk to bringing a pipe to a facility, but it says let's provide connectivity. In this instance, I'll call it kind of end-to-end, where even end users are able to provide to access services within the infrastructure that is connected. Basically, it's broadband connectivity, also the services that needs to run, or in layman's term, the internet services that the beneficiaries have to access. So the focus was on the 970 sites. That is the phase 1. This phase 1 was supposed to be completed by March, February last year. But you are correct. Then due to the COVID challenge, then we couldn't complete connectivity of those 970 sites by February, March last year. But the good news is that the phase 1 connectivity of the SA Connect, it's completed, it's done. Those 970 sites in the 8 NHI districts are completed. And what we did as the department, we even went ahead. We even went above the scope that was put on the the scope that was put on the SA Connect Phase 1 to say, now that we have realized, because those are the lessons learned that we pick up as we implement, that some of the schools do not have the local access network, the WLAN, or even some of the schools are still using home computers. But maybe to bring to the colleagues that we have different mandates as the government. And I've yet, the previous speakers have emphasized, Mr. Kanyile, emphasized to say we need to work together and look at the ecosystem. And this is what we have realized as government, that our mandate as the department could be to bring the connectivity to the school. But ultimately, if the school, they are not ready, they don't have even budgets, or the demand side is not ready, then we therefore need to integrate to come up with a collaborative way to ensure that once connectivity is there, it is utilized. It doesn't become a white elephant. You'll recall that the 2010 National Brown Policy, we didn't talk about the demand side. We only talk about the supply, building the infrastructure. So as part of Phase 1, we managed to save some, we have some savings from the project cost. And we therefore tasked CETA and Broadband Infraco, which is our implementing agency, and entities in particular department, to also expand this Connect program by providing the wireless local the area network protocols, and also Wi-Fi hotspot in other public facilities, such as the health facility. For example, you want to see a situation where even patients, when they visit the hospital, they are able to even have access to internet, or they could even do their business within the Wi-Fi platform. Students could also do their assignments, research, while they are waiting to be attended. We are aware about the COVID protocol that it might even now even taking longer for a patient to be attended to by the health official. I think it's Conrad.
I think Conrad is eager to speak because he just unmuted himself.
Okay.
I think from a community network perspective, thank you so much, Peter, for clarifying and explaining the different phases 1 and 2. Conrad Lobster, welcome to
maybe sorry for interjecting. I just wanted to close the part of the Phase 2. I only spoke about the Phase 1.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes.
But in terms of Phase 2 is not yet implemented.
Yes.
The reason being, we were requested to conduct the national feasibility study to assess how the country can provide broadband connectivity to to government facilities and even the community at large. So what we did, National Treasury advised us to partner with the Development Bank of South Africa, which is our DBSA, to conduct that particular feasibility study. Ideally, it was supposed to have been completed end of December last year, but it was completed January this year. Where it is, the study is done. There is engagement to formally hand over the study to the department, obviously the manager to endorse and approve. So there are still some inputs that needs to be made by the department to DBSA to finalize it. And the study will assist the country in terms of moving forward. How do we now connect broadband? What are the technology options that we should consider as a country? What are the broadband implementation models? Can the province in itself be an implementing agency? Can the state-owned companies such as your Prasa Transnet become the implementing agency of broadband government networks? How will funding be sourced out? What are the funding approach that we need to consider? What are the governance requirements? What are the regulatory frameworks that we need to consider? So the study is looking into various aspects. Once the study, the report is accepted, that report becomes or approved. That report becomes an input into developing a business case for implementation of Phase 2 SA Connect. So in terms of Phase 2, we are not yet there. We're still finalizing the study, and that will inform the business case development. So, but in a nutshell, Phase 1 is complete. Unfortunately, we couldn't do the entire 6135. The remainder 5,000 odd will be catered into the Phase 2 implementation, as in when funding is made available.
So while we're still on carrying on the remainder that we could not, that the department could not cater for in Phase 1, let's have a discussion about the speed. I read an article on IT Web that the speed for phase 2 would be increased to 100 megabits per second, whereas for phase 1, the entities connected were only on 10 megabits per second. So are we now moving forward, or are we going to then go back? And is the department going to go back to the 970 government entities that were on 10 megabits per second and increase the speed? And taking into consideration, I would assume that the study also highlighted the demand of speed. Now that a majority of South Africans are working from home, or yes, and using the internet, particularly more often for work than the other means of connectivity before.
Absolutely, Judy, you are correct. The speed it's given in terms of the SA Connect targets that are in the policy, stipulated in the policy. By 2020, actually we're behind. By 2020, 50% of government facilities should have been connected at 100 megabits per second. So meaning, in a nutshell, meaning even those connected 10 megabits per second, as soon as funding is being available, then they need to be upgraded to 100 megabits per second so that we comply with the target that is set out in the SA Connect policy. So the unconnected and the connected will then be upgraded to the 100 megabits per second. That is what is outlined in the SA Connect policy. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter Melo. Welcome, Conrad Lubsa. Welcome to this panel discussion where we discuss connecting the unconnected. I know you've done quite a lot and continue to do quite a lot of work within community networks. I think my question, and unfortunately we don't have a speaker present from our Universal Access Fund, but from a community network perspective and point of view, what are the challenges of community networks that community networks face in terms of working or trying to validate themselves, both from working with the Universal Access Fund, or be it working with the regulator from that point of view?
Hi, everyone. I think probably the biggest challenge is access to skills, to understanding how to competently manage a network. I mean, so I spend a lot of time volunteering, helping small networks, and anybody who asks me to come up with the network design and the network planning and the configuration, because that's the whether the network works and provides value to somebody is that's the foundation. If people are just going to get some money and buy some equipment and plug everything in and hope it works, and it only works half the time, that does deliver some value to some people some of the time, but it's not going to generate the momentum that a network needs in order to grow. For a network to grow, it needs to be really, really good and world-class. And we can build networks like that with the technology we have access to today. I mean, you can buy a router today that is faster than the best thing that the biggest company had just 10, 15 years ago. So costs isn't the biggest problem, but access to the knowledge and the skills for network design is. And I mean, it's such a complex problem. And I think another thing that's often overlooked is the scale, like how small a community network really is. But it's not, I mean, the scale isn't a problem if there are many of these networks. I mean, it doesn't matter where in the world you go. Like, you can go into the richest, fanciest city with the biggest government budgets and the best government programs, and you'll find there people who are unable to connect or unable to use connectivity for things that they want to do and ways that they want to improve or change their lives. So, I mean, so the long and the short of it is that I always try to make things as simple and easy and straightforward and understandable as possible. So I've been asking myself, what would be if it was just an easy, simple thing or simple message that we need to get across in order to make it easier for small networks to get started and grow. And it's been a really tall order. But so I keep getting stuck with not one simple thing, but at least 3 or 4 simple things. So, but for me, from what I've seen, it's the access to skills. What often happens is that I've seen so many networks that are barely functional, that started off good, but there's just something in the foundation that was missing. And then there's a misunderstanding. I mean, the other important thing for a community network is for the community or the volunteers and people who are going to get involved with it to really invite and welcome this into their community. So there's the introduction phase that's sometimes necessary in rural communities. More urban communities, it's not a problem. I mean, even in some of even in some rural, well, probably even most rural communities nowadays, everybody has an idea of what the internet is and what Wi-Fi is and have phones. Anybody with a phone knows that there's this thing that they need in order to be able to do more on the phone, but they don't always understand the kind of things that they can do. So, I mean, and then those of us who have been on the internet for a long time, we know a lot more things, and there's a lot of things that we take for granted that is not universally known. So I think another important thing is that the internet isn't necessarily like good or bad. It's an amplifier of what is there already. So the key things I would say is the introduction and the pull from the community, the support when that community has decided and somebody from the community has decided that this is what they want to do and this is what they need and they want internet and they've seen it elsewhere and there's all these things that they want to change in their community by means of bringing in access, then there needs to be the right support for them. So it's no use just giving them a big grant and hoping for the best. And then sometimes the types of experts or people that you can send their way to support them also need an introduction. They very rarely really, well, maybe it's difficult for the average systems or network administrator, for example, to understand a random community's issues. So, and there needs to be at least a bit of understanding there in order for them to be able to assist with designing the network properly. And then, but the real reason there needs to be a bit of understanding is because they will develop a relationship, and those relationships it's not always as professional and as businessy and straight lines from A to B as we are used to in our normal work environment. So the support that comes outside needs to come with a lot of patience, and this is usually something that these kind of people don't really have. So they also tend to just come in, give some advice, and then if the people don't follow it, then it's their problem. And that's not a good way of doing it. There needs to be some sort of ongoing support. And so for me, something that I've been looking at is how can we establish an organization that can provide this professional support and afford to provide it? Because I mean, most of us are working for big companies and we can earn great salaries, but there's nobody who's going to pay us to support communities like these. And there's also
Conrad, I'm sorry to cut you off, but because of time, speaking of support, Mr. Molefe, I'm going to rope you into this discussion and highlight the issue that the nation currently sits on, which is our spectrum issue, right? And in speaking of the spectrum, I'm going to highlight a quote by Dr. Gebete Modinoeng, to the IT Web, where he said, at this point, the regulator cannot negotiate spectrum licenses, but the regulator has to make sure that it licenses spectrum in the public interest. And highlighting what Conrad is saying around support, what becomes of community ISPs? Is there a framework of high frequency demand spectrum earmarked for community networks? This is a question for you, Mr. Molefe.
So,
this is for
okay,
Mr. Molefe Conrad, Mr. Molefe from ICASA.
Sorry, I didn't get the last part.
Did you hear my question, Mr. Molefe?
Yes, I think I've heard that.
All right, thank you.
Yes, Moderator, thank you. I've been listening to Conrad, and then he's been highlighting issues or challenges that are faced by the community networks. In particular, he mentioned two very important aspects or challenges. And then one is in respect with the lack of technical skills in terms of how they can maintain and manage the community networks. And then the other one, I think he mentioned that the lack of awareness as to how the community networks can be exploited in order to derive the maximum benefit for the communities. Now, when we come to the spectrum issue, yes, there have been some lobbying in terms of the challenges which are faced by the community networks with respect to the availability of spectrum, especially spectrum in the license band. Because currently the community networks, they are exploiting the spectrum in the 2.4 and 5.8 gigahertz. Yes, indeed, it's not simple. There's no current framework that particularly caters for the spectrum requirements for the community networks. And then we are aware of the challenges that the community networks face with respect to the the license spectrum fees. So, and considering that they are the non-profit organizations or non-profit entities, indeed, the cost of spectrum might be a deterrent or a barrier in terms of the development of the community networks. However, there are some initiatives that the authority or ICASA has put in place just to alleviate the fact that there is the scarcity of spectrum, especially that will cater for the community networks. So one of those interventions that have been put in place, we can talk about the TV white spaces, which will go a long way in at least providing affordable internet connectivity to the rural places. So pertaining to that, the authority has published a regulation of TV white space, which will become effective from the 1st of April, where the community networks can exploit this opportunity to have access to spectrum without being charged any spectrum fees. And then it also allows the SMMEs also to exploit this opportunity to commercialize the TV white space technology. However, in terms of the license band, which are exclusively licensed to certain operators, the authority in its 5-year strategy is just to ensure that they extend the technology of TV white space to the other bands, which are non-terrestrial broadcasting bands. However, to do that, there is a collaboration with the research institutions in order to come with the innovative ways of coming with some methods to to deploy dynamic spectrum assignments. And then once this is, it usually takes time. It cannot be done overnight. So it's driven by innovation. And then again, the authority has put in place some regulations which promote innovation and research. So innovation and research is very important in driving us to how spectrum can be fully utilized and optimally utilized as well. So it is envisaged that maybe in the next, we know that it's going to take time in the next 5 years. There will be some innovative spectrum management techniques that will allow the community networks to also exploit the opportunity to share spectrum that is currently licensed on an exclusive basis to the operators without paying spectrum fees.
Does this mean, I'm sorry to cut you off, Mr. Philemon Mulip, does this mean then the renewal, what we understand and know about the regulators' renewal of the licenses, is it still happening during the period of 2022 to 2023, or in the middle, or just around that period? Should we be expecting these innovative sharing of spectrum programs you're speaking of?
Yes, it's more about putting a framework in place that will allow and support the industry or even the MMSEs to come with some innovative ways of spectrum sharing. So usually it's a long process because there will be instances whereby the trials will be conducted.
Yes.
And then in terms of the regulations that are put in place, there is a provision that encourages the industry or interested parties to conduct trials. Once the trials are successful, then when the authority will come with some possible intervention in support of those innovations. So usually it will take a consultative process, which might take a year or two until the authority comes with a regulation in terms of making it feasible for spectrum sharing going into the future. But it's not a short-term thing because to manage the spectrum in an efficient way, reserving spectrum for community networks it's not appropriate because it will defeat the purpose. But what they can benefit from is if they can share spectrum, in an opportunistic manner with the current licensees. So this approach is in the pipeline in terms of ICASA's 5-year strategy. So in terms of the renewals of the licenses, I didn't get it clear there. In terms of, are you talking in terms of renewal of the licenses on an annual basis, or what do you mean?
So the question was from the question and answer section, right? That the spectrum is already in the hands of the telecom incumbents and will remain as such at the point of renewal for their licenses, and most of which should happen during 2022 to 2023 time window. And so this arrangement shows little or perhaps no regard to the needs of the new entrants, particularly the community networks, as well as the current market dynamics.
Thank you for clarification. Yes, indeed, the radio frequency spectrum licenses for the current licensees, they are valid for the period of their service licenses. Yes, however, there's no shortcut when it comes to regulatory processes. To say in 3 years' time, we should have at least a regulation in place that allows the sharing of spectrum. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. Yes, it might take the duration of the service license to expire before a new regime is put in place in terms of as to whether during the renewal of the service licenses for the operators, will they also be required to renew their spectrum licenses? And then as to whether the authority will maintain the status quo. So there might be a different regime by the time of the end of the service license period, the validity when it expires, that a new regime is put in place. Probably that takes into consideration the needs of the community networks. But there's no shortcut when it comes to regulatory processes.
I can imagine. So while we're still talking about spectrum, Mr. Molefe, and again, critics would say the 700 megahertz band put aside for the WAN is not clean, as digital migration has not been completed. So that means that even if the licensing of the WAN would be fast-tracked, the WAN would have to wait for the digital migration to be completed before being able to implement effective services. I'm not sure if Mr. Melo can also chip in on this one.
Moderator, that's misinformation. Currently, there is spectrum available in the 700 megahertz and 800 megahertz, although that it's not available on a national basis, but it's available on geographical basis. Just to make an example, to say during the COVID-19, ICASA released the high demand spectrum, and including those bands that were released, it was 700 and 800. And as we speak, operators are using 700 and 800 where it is available. So there are areas within the 9 provinces where spectrum in the 700 and 800 megahertz can be utilized. The difference is that it cannot be done on a national basis. Even during COVID, there is a requirement, and there's also an obligation or a condition that has been imposed in those licenses to say the 700 and 800 megahertz spectrum should be utilized by the operators in coordination with the broadcasters to minimize the effects or the possibility of harmful frequency interference. So the public has been informed, or there is a perception that has been created to say spectrum in the 700 and 800 megahertz bands cannot be utilized whilst digital migration hasn't been completed entirely. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you for clarifying that, Mr. Molefe. We're going to pull Mr. Melo back. There's a question on the question and answer session from Pule Johannes Mufukeng. Pule says, the department's underway broadband-related initiatives seem to be more fragmented as there is still no central planning framework to lead to a successful implementation of broadband, at least across 9 provinces. What is the current actionable plan to accelerate the implementation of the much needed infrastructure, particularly in destitute areas? Mr. Melo?
Yeah, thanks, Dudu, and thanks for the question. I think also maybe it's good that we have this kind of forums so that we can also appraise the community's citizens about the work that the department is doing. In terms of coordination, there is a central coordination. You'll be aware that prior the urban policy, SA Connect 2013 gazetted policy, the implementation was done in a fragmented way. But since the SA Connect policy has been approved and implementation thereof resumed from 2014 and 15 financial year, there is a coordination. Number one, maybe just to update the colleagues to say, provinces in their own right have got the authority to roll out their own broadband infrastructure. But the good part is that there is a coordination forum where they ensure that there is no duplication, there is alignment with the national broadband policy. So currently, the network that we are seeing in Western Cape, the network that we are seeing in Limpopo, deployed by Limpopo Connection, the network that we are seeing in Gauteng broadband network, it's efficiently aligned with the program of the national department, which is SA Connect. We are also engaging, collaborating with other sister departments, basic education, health, higher education. In the event that they do have budget to proceed with connecting their facilities, they do come to us. We do have forums, we do have provincial broadband structures that meet regularly to ensure that this coordination happens. And going forward with the phase 2, we will see the initiative from the government or the will from the government, from national government, to establish a centralized project management office that will ensure that broadband is rolled out across the country in a coordinated and aligned way. So I just wanted to respond to the question that how we are implementing broadband now as a national department, we are aligned with other provincial initiatives and most even the local government. You'll be aware that the local government also are rolling out their broadband initiatives. I think Mr. Mkwanazi are aware of this Tswane, Wi-Fi and the rest. We have seen such initiatives in Dr. Kenneth Kaunda, that is Potchefstroom then. Those particular networks are also integrated into the bigger picture, or they are guided by the National Broadband SA Connect framework. So in the efforts that we are working on, we are saying there must be, if no, less duplication of infrastructure and of efforts, based on the fact that we are all challenged by funding mechanism and other resources that are required to ensure that the national networks are properly implemented. Thanks, Dudu.
Thanks, Peter. I think we're only left with 9 minutes, and that allows me to offer our panelists closing remarks on the topic of connecting the unconnected. Conrad, I suppose this would be a question and a statement that says, from me to you, that says, look, community networks have an array of support systems, particularly from international donors. We're looking at your APC and other international funders that come into these communities and start up these amazing projects. I will highlight the current TV White Space project that WAPA is currently doing with its members. Do community networks rather feel that there should be more transparency in terms of projects, implementation of connectivity projects as far as the department is concerned, so that community networks can also take part?
Okay, so that's quite a mouthful, but I'll try to keep it brief. So I want to bring things back to what I think the 3 main pillars of a community network is, and that's social, skills, and technology. So the social is the access, that the value that the network brings, and there are lots of organizations that look at the social aspects. And there's also a lot of universities involved in the social aspect. There's more that can be done, but social is a very important one, and I think it's the groundwork, it's the pre-foundation. And then the foundation for a community network is skills. But the problem that a lot of people make is they try to imbue too many skills in the community, and they might not be, the community might not be receptive to skills that are not immediately valuable to them. So under skills, I would include things like access to bookkeeping and planning and support. And I think this is where most of the external organizations and support, funding, as I mentioned, I don't think funding is a big problem. Funding is a problem to most networks because they don't have the skills to accept and manage the funding. So I see a very clear need for better support from the funding organizations, like bodies or an independent entity that can use the funding and turn the funding into equipment and knowledge and independence for the communities. And then, what we've been talking about mostly here, I would put under the heading of technology. So we have the social things, the skills, and the technology. So the technology is the spectrum and the hardware and the access to backhaul, and funding is also very relevant to the technology because for a small network, the technology is relatively cheap. But as that network starts growing, the cost of the technology increases almost exponentially. So, and then that's where the skills and the planning plays a very important role, because without that skills and planning, those costs will escalate way too quick. And it's also very difficult to gauge like where one network, how one network compares to another, because one network might be spending millions to connect tens of thousands of people, while another network might be able to do it with a few $100,000 rand. So, and that all boils down to skills, in my opinion. So I don't know if that gave you some insight, but if you can maybe ask the question again in terms of the social. So you asked about transparency. So I think that mostly. Okay. So here's the other thing. From a regulation perspective, it's very difficult. So there are organizations that understand the regulations very in depth and are working are consulting with the regulators and making suggestions and recommendations. But what we have to always keep in mind with regulation is that regulation is much more relevant to large organizations. The scale in the market is really something that's overlooked a lot. So you can't, most regulation addresses networks with hundreds of thousands to millions of customers. But there are a lot of networks with just a few thousand to tens of thousands of customers. And in that small scale, the regulation that is good for the public as a whole, that is applied to the big organizations, when that same regulation is applied to small organizations, it actually holds them back, and it makes it more difficult for them to actually provide a service where there is a big organization. And that's not by design or by intent, it's just an unintended consequence of focusing on the immediate problem at hand, which is the issues addressing the big organizations that are providing access to millions of people. But if we look at the statistics, especially of the number of people served by the small organizations, then it really adds up. So if we look at the curve of organizations and how many people they serve, like 80% of the country is served by probably 5 companies, 80% of the country. So when we talk about community networks, we're not talking about that 80%. The curve, my camera is inverted, but it's a logarithmic curve that looks like this. So 80%, like this is number of customers served by an organization. So 80% of the people are served by a handful of companies, like less than 10, last I counted. But then there's also this long curve of hundreds of companies that are each just serving a few thousand customers or a few hundred customers. And so, but when you look at the area under the curve, like there's when we talk about community networks, we're talking about this long tail and about all the small ISPs and networks, and and especially about universal access. I mean, universal access is an issue in this long tail, and so again, back to the big problem that I see is the skills, and the skills to support the social aspects and the technology aspects. The technology aspect is a big one. Regulation is about the technology, and the technology factors into the cost, but with the right skills, it can all be managed. So again, I'm actually inviting anybody who has a real passion and a desperate interest in improving the situation for community networks to get in touch with me, and let's see what we can do to create a proposal for an organization that can transparently address the big issues that the academics have picked up in numerous community networks.
Okay.
And
I'm afraid
this is not just a South Africa problem. I mean, this is a global thing. Like, we are not unique. So there's also a lot of international collaboration that's possible.
Yeah, I'm afraid because of time, Conrad, we have to keep it there so we could break for tea before just the next session. But I hope Mr. Philemon Molefe and Mr. Pitimelo, you would heed to Conrad's call to action. That would have to work together and connecting the unconnected and trying to figure out from a regulatory point of view, which I believe the regulator is working to figure out. So hence the initiatives such as TV white spaces and others to ensure that the community networks are also catered for, but also from a SA Connect point of view, moving into phase 2, you made mention of the central coordination and how we can move or work together with community networks in terms of support or skills as we work to connect the unconnected. Gentlemen, thank you so much for availing yourself to be part of this panel. I've learned so much and walk away very informed about what our regulator is doing in catering for community networks, but also for ICT SMMEs, as well as I've gained new insights on what the department is working towards phase 1 as well as phase 2 of the long-awaited SA Connect. Thank you so much for being part of this panel discussion. Mr. Sonwabo, do you want to take over?
No, thank you, Ms. Mkwanazi. Thank you so much. Much appreciated. Thank you to Mr. Lupsa. And thank you to Mr. Molefe. We appreciate that. If you may please deactivate your cameras and so that we should also have some other session to continue right now. Mr. Lupsa.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Sonwabo. Could you please switch off your camera? There's a session that's coming. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Much appreciated. Colleagues, just to thank you again, my name is Peter Madabu, the current chairperson of the ZAIGF. I'm going to be taking you over to the next session as your panelist, as your moderator, and if needs be, I'll also be your program director. Thank you. Without wasting time, colleagues, the next session is the session that talks about enhancing a multi-stakeholder approach in South Africa. For those who are within the space, you will know that multi-stakeholder approach is the approach that takes everybody in. You talk about your government, your private sector, academia, civil society, everybody. It's a collective kind of an approach that we want everybody to be part of that. So the next session, I'm going to be joined by the acting DG of DCDT. That would be Ms. Nongqubelo Jordan. And then we'll also be joined as a panelist by Ms. Juju Mkwanazi, who both of them will be talking about their views on the multi-stakeholder approach. in terms of the internet inside South Africa. So I would want to give each one of them time just to introduce themselves, to tell us who they are, where they come from, and what they do. Ms. Mkwanazi, before you put the mark down, I'll start with you. Please proceed.
Thank you. Thank you so much. My name is Dudu Mkwanazi. I am a director of Uju Digital. Uju Digital is an ICT SMME consulting company. Essentially, we work with ISPs, both here in the country as well as outside continentally in Lagos and Tanzania. And what we picked up as Uju Digital is the fact that they are typically, a lot of ISPs struggle with the same or similar challenges, whether you're an ISP in South Africa or you're an ISP in Ajungwele in Lagos, is one, business development, two, business integrated systems and processes, and three, putting yourself out there as an ISP with less financial muscle. So you'd find a lot, especially when you have the debates around your spectrum allocation, ISPs tend to not particularly have a positive voice as far as spectrum allocation is concerned, because of course, lack of financial muscle. And as well as, ISPs tend not to get funding from big institutions such as the DABSA, for example, because of one, lack of internal processes within the organization, but as well as the skills around business development. So as Uju Digital, we work with these small ISPs at a very inexpensive cost to assist them spot the growth and opportunities as well as gaps within their businesses, and help them scale and get into partnerships, industry partnerships, as well as international partnerships, to ensure that they are able to provide services within the communities, but also as a business grow. So because I do not think a current SMME wants to sit at the level and being considered as an SMME for eternity, right? So the whole process, each SMME has a lifespan that you become an SMME for a certain period of time, and therefore would grow into a business that not only is the backbone of the economy, but also adds to the country's GDP. And I think from the discussion around multi-stakeholder approach.
If you can hold it there,
right.
We'll take it. I must say you gave me a long introduction, but I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, let me take this opportunity to also call upon the acting DG, Ms. Nongobela Jordan, to also introduce herself. ADG, the floor is yours.
Well, a very good morning to you, Peter. I know that our Deputy Minister was here this morning, and I also want to greet the leadership at .ZEBNA and all those present on this platform chat. My name is Nongobela Jordan Gani. I'm the Acting Director General at the Department of Communications. My formal position is that of being the Deputy Director General responsible for international affairs and trade. I've been at the department for many years. It shall not be declared. But one of the programs that I have been working on is the Internet Governance Program, together with the WSIS agenda, the multilateral programs under the ITU, as well as the UN, at a regional level as well under the AU and within SADC. And we also then deal with bilateral as well as trade programs, ensuring that we also boost export and also increase then investment in the country. So I've been acting Director General since January of this year. And yes, it's an honor for me to join you this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, ADG, and thanks to Ms. Mkwanazi. Just a little bit of a background. I'm sure most of you will know that the inception of internet was from the one country, to be specific, was America, where it was only used by the US Army, where it was only controlled by one source. Right now, as time evolves, now everybody, anywhere, anyhow, is allowed to be part of that. Hence, they introduced the multi-stakeholder approach instead of one person governing that. You will know, within the continent as well, there are countries where in the internet governance, it's within the state itself. It's not a multi-stakeholder approach. I'm sure you remember many times you have seen, you have watched, you have read about the issues of shutdowns because there's only one side that controls that. So we're happy within South Africa, we're using the multi-stakeholder approach where we want everybody to be part of that. Hence, when it started, we wanted to have everybody within the different spaces. I'm sure you have seen the agenda and the contribution by other people here. It's not one-sided. We have people that are from the academia, we have private sectors, we got civil society, we got government, we have SOEs, we have people on the ground. This is just to get a view of how people see this and their input as well. So Ms. Mkwanazi, if I can just start with you there. With the multi-stakeholder approach, according to you, what is it that is lacking? What is it that we should do better? And what is it that is waking?
Thank you, Peter.
What we don't have, what should have?
Yeah, I think the question, when we discuss the multi-stakeholder approach, the question of who should initiate or drive a multi-stakeholder approach or process is really very much dependent on the local setting and context. But often with the work that we're currently doing, it's clear that civil society driven partnerships models far better than the public sector models, and this is informed as far as civil society taking advocacy and lobbying out to the street and being able to be more vocal and therefore utilizing that the advocacy model to then lobby for more projects or more funding in the cases, for instance, I'll make an example of community networks. And I think that's what is working currently is from a public sector, civil society, private sector point of view on a multi-stakeholder approach in our country. It speaks to, I'll make an inference to what the department currently does, or the regulator currently does, when we have a new regulation out there or proposals and reaching out to both public sector, private sector, and civil society to give input on a bill or a policy being a framework, and therefore utilizing the stakeholders' input to inform our current policies or bills. I think that works very much well. What doesn't currently work, and I would take an example of our Gauteng issue, which hopefully won't be an issue anymore, would be an e-toll, where the consultation process is either shortcut or was just not included at all in the process.
All right. No. Thank you, Ms. Mkwanazi. ADG, you have worked before as a acting director. As a DDG, where you were participating in the international platforms, the continental platforms, and issues of the multi-stakeholder approach in terms of the infrastructure development and cybersecurity came a number of times. Based on what you have experienced and what you have observed, what is it that is lacking? Where are we as a country? Is our approach working? Is there something that we need to do better? I'm saying this because I'm appreciative of the input in terms of all the other SOEs and the private sector, We have seen Telkom initiating the connectivity issues. We have seen USASA. We have seen BBI. We have seen the post office. And we've seen the civil society where you will have the community sectors initiating these infrastructure development on their own. And I can say much about the government. So your take on this, ADG?
Thanks, Peter. So I would also want to concede, if I may, that I think one of our biggest obstacles is the fact that there is no proper coordination. And I'll also maybe just to borrow on your previous question that you sent to Duduzile, that if we had one plan as a country, and we all rallied behind that one plan, we would probably be much ahead, and we'll be much coordinated. We would build the partnerships that we need to do, would have that social compact that is very much needed. And that would result in effective execution. Granted, I concede that all of us in our respective roles, as you said, so Telkom knows that its objective is closing the digital divide, providing services and access. As you said, all the state-owned entities within the ICT sector, they also have the exact same goal. Your ISPs would have that. Even your broadcasters would contribute towards that. All of private sector. And also then we have, as you said, civil society or NGOs, national and international. They're all committed towards this. But the fact is, unfortunately, we're all working in silos. And therefore the coordination does not result in a huge impact. You would see as a result, there would be duplications in terms of infrastructure rollout. You would also then still have areas and pockets in our society that are still not, or underserved as the term would go, but they don't have an equal service as those that are being enjoyed in the urban areas. And yet we're all one people. We all have equal rights, and therefore we should all have then equal access to then services. So that from an international, we are grappling with that. Africa, I think another issue that we see as a huge challenge, especially when it comes to your infrastructure rollout, is the issue of funding. Unfortunately, most of it, we've left it for long, that it was in the hands of, in the private hands, and therefore they looked at where it's commercially viable, and we would not go in areas where it's not. So the continent that is seen as the least developed and least amount in terms of affordability, and hence we then have this huge percentage in terms of that we haven't yet closed this digital divide. And yet you go into Europe, and you would, as you know, you travel across countries as amount of land. And even in the most, what they consider their rural areas, which would be their farm areas, they still have internet services. So I think we have to start, I think also politically, which we, as it was also considered in previous sessions by panel members, that there is a political will and support. Our president, our minister, as well as even other ministers, they've seen that ICTs are an essential services. So the political will is there. The private sector support is also there. However, it's also, the fact is it's not directed. Hence I said we need that one consolidated plan by everybody, so that we are all then in one accord to then say, when we are rolling out, we roll out throughout South Africa, and not just in your urban areas where then there is affordability. But we also know that there is that girl child that is sitting in Banduli that actually needs services, cannot be able to go to school during COVID and lockdown, but would like to achieve and is actually a brilliant child, would like to be a scientist one day. So we have to ensure that she also is able to get those services. So I'm hoping that later on I'll be able to talk about some of the programs that we are doing as a department. But your theme is very much so relevant, that we have to enhance this multi-stakeholder compact. And we must have then one approach as South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, AGG, and we really appreciate it. Ms. Mkwanazi, from the SMME side, you mentioned the issue of funding, the issue of lack of internal processes within the institutions. How are you, as part of the SMME, trying to deal with that, or to correct that, or to find assistance in that regard?
Thanks, Peter, for the question. I think, so from an SMME point of view, I think SMMEs are very fortunate in a South African context, from a point of view that government has extended an array of opportunities as far as SMME funding is concerned, as well as I'll touch based on the previous session on the speaker from ICASA saying licenses were issued for ICT SMMEs to then roll out the service or internet services during the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think there's an array of opportunities and resources available for SMMEs. On the question of internal processes, it's really an issue of skills again, and this then feeds back to our education system. That if we look at our current unemployment rates, and not all young people were destined to be entrepreneurs and run their businesses. However, if our education system caters to educating young people around a typical business management and typical financial literacy on managing and running businesses, and this then will feed into individuals running their homes, and this will feed into a much larger array of things. You're looking at the amount and level of debt young people are carrying out of university and into their first jobs and into their first entrepreneurial journey. And I think there's a lack of skills and a lack of education. And unfortunately, this isn't something for those that don't have the financial resources to then go at a university and enroll for a business management course. I think our education system from an FET or high school level should be focusing on gearing and empowering young people on how to particularly manage their finances and how to move around that, because that then becomes an issue. I don't think SMMEs fail because of lack of support. I think when an SMME does get supported by either the department or a government institution or state-owned institution, it's the lack of knowing on how to manage one's resources and particularly, the strategies on scaling and business development, which always will then filter back into our education system. I hope that answers your question, Peter.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Mkwanazi. ADG, there's a question or the comment that's coming from one of the listener here, to be specific, Mr. Paul Yule, that to say that when will the national ICT white paper going to actually mean something to us? Is there something that you can say in relation to that in terms of the national ICT program progress in relation to the multi-stakeholder approach in terms of the developments within the country?
Certainly, thanks. And thank you very much for the question. So we adopted, the Cabinet approved the National ICT White Paper in 2016. And there are some very key recommendations stemming out of that, which we are busy with as a department. One of these, obviously, I think everyone knows, it's quite topical right now. We minister in July 2019 issued policy direction on the high demand spectrum. But more importantly, the minister also issued a policy direction on the wireless open access network. This was hugely debated by society. But the reason for that, the principal objectives from us, was that we needed to transform industry, transforming the sector as well, ensuring a wider participation by SMMEs, as well as also the specific groups such as women, youth, as well as people with disability. So we're very deliberate in intending to say that whatever new licenses that come on board, we actually ensure that there's a deliberate focus towards women, youth, and people with disability, as well as SMMEs. And it also advocated the policy direction with regards to open access. We talked about the fact that, so it's open access in as far as that these new players or new entrants must also have access and rights to your towers, in terms of the infrastructure, because obviously as you're starting off, you will not have then the capital in order to roll out. But we're also advocating in terms of universal service and access, and this is what we're talking about, the closing of the digital divide. So that we need to ensure that the rural and underserved communities, they also receive services. And then one of two last issues regarding the WAN as well as the high demand spectrum was that they must respond to affordability. I think as a country, we all been complaining about the high cost of data. And therefore, we need to ensure that we reduce, this will ensure the reduction of the cost of communication. And then lastly, it must also then increase competition, again, indirectly then to impact with regards to cost. The other programs also stemming out of the the white paper, was that we agreed on that we'll establish a state digital infrastructure company. So I know in your earlier sessions, there was a discussion about that, the fact that as government, we need to aggregate all the ICT infrastructure in the country. I know that my colleague Peter Mello also spoke about that as well. So we're not just merging BBI and Centec, but all of government's infrastructure as part of the phase 2 will then be aggregated. And so we're talking about the infrastructure under ESCOM, the infrastructure under PRASA, and anywhere else, SANRAL. We're going to have to aggregate that into one, the state digital infrastructure company, towards then ensuring that we close this digital gap. And then subsequently thereafter, we also said there are various under industry groups and associations. So this is talking to the multi-stakeholder that will also need to form part of the infrastructure, digital infrastructure rollout. So we decided to give more focus with regards to SMMEs across the value chain. We said that there's need for the ISPs to come on board. So the digital infrastructure looks at the core infrastructure, which will be your broadband rollout from your submarine cables or from satellite. And then it comes in towards your switches nationally, your internet exchange points, to your internet service providers, providing them services to home as well as to cloud. And in all those areas, we're very deliberate as a government to say SMMEs must be seen to have a share and they must play a role. So it's not just about beneficiation, but it's about empowerment of the SMMEs, that they have to then take up a stake within this value chain. So those are some of the programs that we were affirmed as a department. And then the last issue was on localization. I think as any country right now, we know firstly that there is talent and there is skill, but we were very deliberate to say we have to build up on our localization program. So both, as I said, across the spectrum within the ICT sector, we must be able to build up on our own local innovation, from your smart devices that you would need on a day-to-day to the needs that would be there in terms of school children, in terms of your tablets that must be manufactured locally. If you go to the home, we also want equally the same type of gadgets and tablets to also then be available. So that's why in as far as we're closing the migration from analog to digital, the set-top boxes that we encourage the local manufacturing of those set-top boxes, and now even more modern, your IDTVs as well. So, and even with you go to your health sectors, so the Fourth Industrial Revolution report makes recommendations on the fact that they must utilize the 4IR technologies to actually amplify and boost the services in their respective sectors. So whether it's going to be in health, in agriculture, in mining, etc., we want to utilize drones, the IoTs that are there, and we're encouraging, as I said, the local SMMEs to build up on that and to also then produce the relevant devices and software in order to move this country forward. So yes, a lot has been stemming out of the National ICT White Paper, and especially within the area of your digital infrastructure. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, ADG. Ms. Mkwanazi, the media is part of the multi-stakeholder approach. Would you say that they're doing their part in terms of covering what needs to be covered, supporting you as an SME? I'm saying that because prior to this session, we had a session that was run by the moderator. To be specific, that was Ms. Kilebile Mulopiane. She's running a sort of like an incubation. What we saw from the video right now is something that most of us didn't know about it. And it's something that if we honestly know about it in time and from the business sector, private sector, some are able to stand up and support such. Your comment, Ms. Mkwanazi?
Thank you, Peter. I think, yeah, I was really impressed by how Kilebogile took the video and showed us what the hub is doing in Pretoria. I cannot speak for the media, unfortunately. My qualifications are not are limited to that of the media, but having worked in the industry and worked along on a multi-stakeholder approach with the media, I'll tell you one or two things. I think the media will come to party when an SMME is sharing the work that they're doing. And the media then acts as a voice, I suppose, to uphold and show the progress that's done. I think it's up to the SMMEs. There's an array of tools and resources for SMMEs to showcase the work that they're doing, as opposed to leaving it all to the media. And that's where digital marketing then comes on par. I think SMMEs then have the obligation and the responsibility to utilize the digital marketing tools that lay free of charge. If we're going to have if we're having the conversation that the acting DG highlighted on the department assisting and empowering SMMEs need to also empower themselves. I think when Kilebogile, the previous moderator, was showcasing the work of the hub that is doing, I think in my head, the first question that came into mind was, for an SMME that's doing work around 4IR, the question would be, what is their digital marketing strategy and what is their digital strategy to showcase themselves, and as opposed to leaving out and say, well, the media is not picking us. You turn on IT Web or the broadband media, and all you see are incumbents. Then it's up to us as SMMEs to utilize and showcase the work that we're doing. And it's all online, and all these digital marketing resources and tools are there. I think SMMEs need to develop strategies on how they showcase themselves in the work that they're doing, not only for funding, but also for the community to see the work that they're doing and to promote the work that they're doing. As opposed, and yes, the media's role would then come and pick this up and ask more questions around the work that the SMME is doing. But I think to just sum it up, there is an array list of tools and resources that can assist SMMEs, and SMMEs need to then tap into those tools around digitally marketing their projects and their programs, and the media will come and work with us. Thanks, Peter.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Ms. Mkhwanazi. There's a question, unfortunately, it's coming from Anonymous. I don't know why one want to be anonymous, but the question is how to access the mission opportunities for SMME in ICT. AGG, I think you can touch on this one because I know there's an SMME strategy document within the department that is supporting the SMMEs within the ICT sector. Would you be able to respond to that, AGG?
Certainly. So we do have an ICT SMME strategy as a department, and we're also looking for partnership. So part of that strategy has then been that we've knocked on the doors of your telcos as well as your ISPs. We've also come to .ZETNA as well. And we've said to each one of them that what do you have? And also our state-owned entities, I think the most famous of them is CETA, and I think also BBI and Centec also play a role. So we were deliberate to say what programs do you have set aside for SMMEs? So within the CETA database, there's just a deliberate intent by government to procure then digital ICT services from your SMMEs to service the whole of government. So yes, to Anonymous, please have your name, please contact us. Do log in onto the CETA website and register if you are then an IT, if you have an IT company or you have then the IT skills. Within our sector as well, there's a lot, thanks to the BBBE sector codes, there's deliberate intent to ensure that they procure local. So in terms of all services, so if you're looking from your marketing communications to even technology or just in terms of rollout for fiber, all of this is at the state-owned entities then are also deliberate in terms of ensuring that they meet the target. And then with regards to, as I said, BBI as well, they've got a set aside in terms of your SMMEs as part of their rollout, as they are the ones leading together with Centec and CETA. They're rolling out the SA Connect across the country. So we would like to ensure and empower the SMMEs across the country in their respective provinces, as well as your municipalities, to ensure that they are able to then provide services. Similarly, also with USASA as well. So there's a lot with regards to the ICT sector in terms of areas of work. But also want to touch on the fact that we've worked also with other private sector as well as multinationals. I want to come back to your previous question, Peter, with regards to SMME training programs as well. So in NEMISA, we're rolling out, and I think now we've actually even elevated to focusing in terms of your 4IR. So there is artificial intelligence as well as drones, but there are also other drones programs and training that are taking place across the country. KZN just recently issued one, if you go to the KZN government website as well. And then we're also working with the likes of your IBM as well as Google in as far as providing your soft digital skills. So those who are looking in terms of how do I improve on my marketing in terms of digital marketing, Google has those programs. IBM also even has these online programs that are free of charge. Obviously, you just need to get yourself into a Wi-Fi hotspot area, and then you'll be able to log in and provide those services. But we're also more than happy to share those and in terms of your website so that you can be also publicly available. So there's lots of opportunities. I would really invite the person who put the question, Anonymous, that if you can then get in touch with our ICT SMME colleagues, or there's also the ICT SMME chamber that has also been formulated. The head of it is Mr. Muzi Makai, who would also then be able to guide them. So information are also filtered through those platforms as and when they do come up. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, ADG. Ms. Mkwanazi, your parting comment on the approach?
Thanks, Peter. I would say, look, we're, as South Africa, as far as multi-stakeholder approach is concerned, we're well there. But obviously, as the acting DG did mention, there are gaps that need improvement. And unfortunately, there would be instances where we're operating in silos as civil society versus the public sector and the private sector. And this all is born out of the impatience of our government's processes, as well as the implementation of policies, as far as different projects and programs are concerned that inform multi-stakeholders. So that's where you will see these silo projects or duplication of projects, and this is all born. It's out of good intent, but all born out of impatience from our public sector or from our governments, lack of fast pace or lack of a rapid implementation rather. So as far as multi-stakeholder approach on the development of infrastructure, we well there. You know, we now have forums that we would discuss and collaborate as ISPs, as community networks. And so for me, that gives me hope that we are well on a good path and on an effective path as far as multi-stakeholder approach is concerned in South Africa, particularly in the IT industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mkwanazi. I see there's a question or the hand coming from Mr. Sonwabo from Picta. Mr. Sonwabo, please proceed.
Good afternoon. I've actually decided, thank you for giving me the opportunity. I've decided I'm going to take the question or raise it with Osis Nongubela offline than addressing it here. It's fine. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Sonwabo. AGG, your final statement as we close.
No, thank you very much. I saw another comment on the line. I was still reading it from Paul Haju. I don't know whether this is to to everybody or myself, but I will respond. But just to indicate that my parting shots, Peter, I think as the department and the deputy ministers has emphasized on this. There is a very serious need for multi-stakeholder engagement on these very critical issues. The issue with regards to closing the digital divide, as well as ICT development in our country is still remains high and priority. And it is only through, as I said, collaboration and coordination that we'll be able to ensure effective then execution. There's still a lot that we need to do. We need as many partners as possible for us to achieve that. I love the fact that there were certain solutions that were being proposed. Please do bring them forward. I will share with you the contact details of our ICT SMME colleagues and where then colleagues can possibly go for then to register. But as you also had made a commitment that this multi-stakeholder is not going to be a once-off event, but it would be ongoing as we now move towards closing that digital divide, but also ensuring that we build on our digital economy as a country, and no one should be left behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, AGG, and thank you to Ms. Mkhwanazi. We really appreciate it. Colleagues, you'll note that before this session, there was supposed to be a break of 30 minutes, but I decided that we should flow and then take maybe a longer lunch. The next session will be starting at 2:30. If I can please encourage everybody to come back again at 2:30 to continue. We still have sessions, a very interesting session. We have a session where Pike will be part of that. I Found will be part of that. Brand SA will be part of that, and so on and so on. So please don't miss out on the following program. Colleagues, I think let's take a break and then we shall reconvene at 2:30. And thank you again.